There's one name that's become damn near unavoidable and is tied with such synchronicity to Need for Speed's identity and legacy: Blackbox. Blackbox needs no introduction. The well-revered name behind Most Wanted, Underground, Hot Pursuit 2, and yet also some of the series' most divisive games such as Undercover and The Run. They started off as almost a stand-in, EA giving them the reins with full control over Hot Pursuit 2, and from there on after, well, one of the largest underdog stories in racing game history was made. I'm a little biased here due to them being quite literally from my hometown here in Canada, but Blackbox without much doubt has most consistently created the series' most loved games over time. My favorite will pretty much always be Criterion's Hot Pursuit, but the rest of my favorite games in this series, I'll say Blackbox in the back cover. This supercut is a multi-hour marathon, spanning all the way from 2002's Hot Pursuit 2, all the way to 2011's Need for Speed The Run, and includes every single Blackbox review I've written over the past 2 years. I often see in comments recently a large influx of newcomers to the channel asking me to review these games that, funnily enough, I already have years ago. And to keep that energy fresh and revisit one of the most iconic names in video games, this video serves as a testament to each and every one of Blackbox's games as the ultimate Blackbox Need for Speed review. So sit back as we venture into what I'd name the most underrated Need for Speed and Blackbox's first shot at glory. Underrated is a title that's easy to ascribe to many a Need for Speed. With many games that gained a cult following years after their release, games which may not have sold well, but live on as cult favorites. But above all, there's one game that I would easily give the crown: Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2. How often do you hear that title even discussed in the modern day? Everyone and their grandnan has heard ad nauseum about Most Wanted, Carbon, and Underground. Hell, even some of the previously more divisive games such as Prostreet have made a real cultural turnaround in the realm of communally prominent Need for Speed games. And yet almost never do I see the name Hot Pursuit 2 thrown around. It's a shame because if you're asking me, Hot Pursuit 2 is one of the most raw, unapologetic definitions of what Need for Speed can be. One that, considering the direction the series has taken post the Black Box era and into the modern day, has only managed to remain more and more unique with the passage of time. But why is that? I've revisited Hot Pursuit 2 for the first time in well over a decade, in the hopes of answering that very question. So welcome to my review of the most underrated Need for Speed, Hot Pursuit 2. So what then? What made Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 click and remain unique all of these years later? It's not just nostalgia goggles or the fact that it's old. It's something a little more intangible. I wouldn't quite say lightning in a bottle, but it's also that perfect mix of simplicity, atmosphere, and raw, undiluted fun that's aged better than most anyone expected. See, when people talk Need for Speed, the conversation gets a little messy. You've got your street racers, your undercover cops, your Fast and Furious wannabe storylines. But buried underneath that, there's this moment in time where Hot Pursuit 2 just existed. No fluff, no pretense. Just you, a high-powered machine, cops out for blood, and open roads that stretch further than your patience can handle. The game released fresh off of the heels of an almost decade-long run where the series became the household title for exotic cars, slowly freshening things up with the addition of police as the years went by. Hot Pursuit 2 would be the magnum opus, the piece de resistance of this ideology, used in the full power of an entirely new console generation. Hot Pursuit 2 isn't trying to be cool with a storyline or some earn your stripes nonsense. It knows what you're here for, to slap the gas pedal to the floor, dodge spike strips by a hair, and let your primal lizard brain take over. And brother, does it deliver. Let's peel back the curtain for a second though, because Hot Pursuit 2 came out in 2002, at this funny little inflection point in gaming. PlayStation 2 was the king of the castle. Everyone and everything was developing games for it. And for EA, that meant not only would they have far more computing firepower to utilize, but an entirely new team to head the series with the now famously revered Blackbox Games. The extra power that the PlayStation 2 brought forth gave life to a far more enthused experience of what I had mentioned beforehand with the dramatic, exotic car fantasy that the series pioneered. Cars now had far more detail, with the ability to render models with individual body panels, lights, and interiors, something that was never even conceivable before. We hadn't quite reached the level of scanning vehicles yet, and because of the fact that Hot Pursuit 2's car list would be made up of so many day-and-date car releases from 2002, the vehicles were as close as make no difference modeled entirely from photographs. Tracks as well. Not only would the raw fidelity be drawn up far more intensely than ever before, bringing life to some idyllic locales, but for the first time in series history, featuring diverging pathways, or as we know them today, shortcuts. Now, is the execution perfect? Well, no, there are some which do nothing that just give you a far slower route by just taking you off-road, only really being useful for some last-minute police evasions rather than in an in-race advantage. But when these shortcuts did work, they were just plain sick. Some of the viewpoints you'd get being the coolest in the game. I mean, come on, crashing through a gate to find a hidden shortcut through mining paths? The series could never be this cool these days. This is without mentioning the style and variance of the tracks themselves. I've always described the mix of PS2 era visuals and Hot Pursuit 2's artistic track design like stepping into a theme park with an oil painting for a skybox. Just look at that sunset in the Mediterranean. You'll also have verdant trees, lifelike forests set ablaze by forest fires with rescue crews just on site as you fly past at 120 miles an hour. The tropics, which blend that cityscape vibe with a Hawaii-inspired tropical beach just along the outskirts. Volcano, and all. These tracks were from this era that I miss so strongly today, that wasn't afraid to go, does this really make sense? No, but it's a video game and it's really damn sick, so we're just gonna do it anyways. This was a time when racing games weren't burdened by realism in the way that they are today. We weren't handcuffed by simulation physics or trying to be realistic, or bogged down by 100 different tuning menus that 2% of the player base even knows what is happening. Games like Hot Pursuit 2 existed in this pocket of arcade racing magic, right between the ultra cartoony era of Cruisin' USA and before everything turned into hardcore Gran Turismo spreadsheets. And this is where Hot Pursuit 2 thrives. It's a pure fantasy fulfillment with just enough grounded car culture DNA to make you feel like a badass, even if you've never set foot near a racetrack. Continuing on and extrapolating on that very topic, I want to dive into the raw gameplay and how that complements the fantastical need for speed that Hot Pursuit 2 was such a proponent of. The biggest strength here, how ridiculously easy this game is to pick up and play. That's it. No bloated menus, no car collection that feels like a chore. There's no reason to do anything other than straight up drive, man. You want to go rip an E39 M5 down Greece? Boom, done within the first few events of the game. You want to go race certain makes against each other in tournaments to see who comes out on top? You got it. You want to hit 200 miles an hour with cops nippling at your rear bumper like mad dogs? Go nuts. You boot up this game, pick up your poison, maybe the Ferrari 360 or the McLaren F1 LM if you're feeling spicy, and within 60 seconds you're doing triple-digit speeds while sirens wail behind you. There's this simplicity baked into every second of the experience, and the magic, it doesn't dilute over time. Hot Pursuit 2 has this arcade racer DNA where the handling's exaggerated enough just to make the cornering feel satisfying, but it doesn't float into cartoonish Mario Kart territory either. You feel the weight of the car, but you're not wrestling physics, you're dancing with them. Tight corners? Get creative with the handbrake and get a little slide into them. Long straightaway? Punch the nitrous. Well, figuratively speaking, because this was near a Need for Speed that didn't even need gimmicks like nitrous tanks to keep the adrenaline flowing. This loop is utterly addictive. And I've said it before and I'll say it 1,000 times again. I know most Need for Speed fans are the single most resistant to change critters out there, so they'd never let EA even for a single game try this. But I'm telling y'all, drop the open world act and you can hone in on some of the most fun gameplay you'll get out of a racing game. It's not like it's ever worked for this series before. I know, it's not like the literal best-selling racing series of all time are an open world. Okay, yes, I get that World is doing it now. You can shut up in the comments, it's still one of the best-selling things like ever. Once again, this style works, because it's like giving a player access to a huge flock of different yet perfectly honed in and executed theme parks to drive in, instead of one big, vapid, boring open world, which you will forget about. Let's talk career, as Hot Pursuit 2 handles this quite differently to the rest of the series. Instead of one giant career in which you'll work your way through as you put hours into the game, Hot Pursuit 2 gives you multiple smaller careers, definitely feeding that feeling of sequential small wins adding up over time, something that the best games in the series execute. Your first of which is the racer career, which is exactly as it says on the tin. You'll work your way up through a series of exponentially longer and more challenging races on your way to eventually conclude in a giant McLaren F1 LM focused showdown. It's awesome. I mentioned before that the best Need for Speeds thrive off of feeding you small but meaningful wins, and that's exactly the core philosophy that makes up the skeleton for Hot Pursuit 2's careers. For instance, in the racer career, this shows up as challenging yourself by winning the newly unlocked tournament to unlock new tracks and use new cars in free play. And hell, even the gameplay itself is addicting enough to act as a reward. Just getting that privilege of driving faster cars holds so much satisfaction. There's a unique set of tools that you can use to take full advantage of your races here, starting off with the two bumper functions. First of which is an immediate 360 spin all around your car while pausing the game. This would be great to give yourself that little breather to set in your next moves and be a little more strategic. The second one is a little zoom forwards that'll give you a look to the track ahead, see where opponents are, and most importantly, when in a hot pursuit, give you invaluable insight as to where roadblocks and traps may be. And speaking of those cops, they're for the most part absolutely brilliant. Hot Pursuit 2 probably has one of the best police systems in the entire franchise. Full stop. I know, bold statement, right? But hear me out. The cops in this game don't mess around. They don't feel cheap either. It strikes this perfect Goldilocks balance where they're aggressive, but they're smart enough to throw spike strips, set up roadblocks, and even chase you with choppers dropping literal barrels in your path. But it never feels unfair. They're a pretty colossal step up from what police were in the original Hot Pursuit. No longer just a simple, pretty rudimentary roadblock in the face of typical races, and now a damn near immovable obstacle who will do everything in their power to stop you. And the production quality too. How the busted scenes even used real-life mocap. A first time for the series and an insight into just how committed Blackbox was to realizing this vision. It keeps you on your toes in the best way possible. Every race becomes more than just about speed. It's about survival. And the intensity wraps up so naturally. Early races, maybe one or two cops. Easy escapes. But sink your teeth into the later stages, and suddenly it's the National Guard. Helicopters, spike strips, barricades, literal rockets fired at you, by the way. It's absurd. It's over the top. Realistic? God no. This is a video game, people. The bombastic action movie-esque near escapes are what make those wins, especially in the police-focused career, oh so enjoyable. Now, as a tidbit, you can actually play as the police in Hot Pursuit 2. Now, if I'm being totally honest, I don't particularly like doing so. This is the era where police didn't really have much they could actually do to you other than just, well, ram you. Granted, hindsight is a big reason why, especially because of a little game called Hot Pursuit 2010, but that comparison isn't exactly fair, now is it? All of these pieces come together to make Hot Pursuit 2 just click. It doesn't do anything too crazy, but one thing is so evident. Hot Pursuit 2 was very clearly made to be the Need for Speed that Blackbox Studios always dreamt of playing. You watch the developer diaries, hear them talk about this game, and hell, even by playing it for yourself, the sheer passion for Need for Speed is utterly prevalent and timeless. You know what else remains pretty damn timeless? The presentation and vibe of Hot Pursuit 2. Plenty of other Need for Speeds around and after this game leaned way more into that 2000s culture and energy, which has made games like Most Wanted, while an excellent time capsule of an era, when you take them out of that, yeah, nah, they just stick out like a damn sore thumb. Hot Pursuit 2 has managed to teeter that edge far more delicately. Yeah, sure, the cars are the latest and greatest of the 2000s, but just change that alone and the overall feel of the game wouldn't change too much in a more modern incarnation. And speaking of those cars, man, what a list this was. I think this game is a perfect sweet spot for a game more focused on high-performance vehicles. The more lowly end of the car list is still not just interesting and engaging, but has some unique picks not in many other games. The Australian Ford TS50 and HSV Coupe, Mustang Cobra R and E39 M5. But the highest echelon of these rides? The Carrera GT Concept, COK GTR, Diablo, McLaren F1 LM. The list is small, sure, but it does not miss even once. I mean, maybe with the VX220 and Opel Speedster, but that might just be me. I have to take a moment here and appreciate what might be one of my all-time favorite Need for Speed soundtracks. I hope you like high adrenaline rock music, because that's the name of the game here. Hot Action Cop, Buzzhorn, Uncle Cracker, and a little band that I've come to have more than just a slight obsession with, Pulse Ultra. Look, I have to go on a little tangent here because they worked their way up to being one of my favorite bands, with only a single album to their name. It all started from playing this game. Build Your Cages started a spiraling obsession that's got me and some of my friends starting a mini cult around these guys. And they aren't even around anymore. Thanks music industry and typical band drama for breaking up an utterly talented group. Tangent aside and back to the game, remember when racing games had announcers? Just navigating the menus are given so much more life because of that. And on that note, yeah, menus. No hub worlds, garages to tinker with. Nah, you're either racing or you're not. And I love that about these games. And that's precisely what Hot Pursuit 2 emblematized. No BS, simple yet overtly bombastic racing and chases. And the ultimate vision for Need for Speed of its time. But I can't say that about every version of this game. So here's the thing. Hot Pursuit 2 isn't just one game. Yeah, it's got the same name slapped across every box. But under the hood, they're different beasts entirely. And if you played the game on PlayStation 2, well, congratulations, you got the golden ticket. You got the one that EA really wanted to make. The rest, well, they feel like shadows of that vision. Polished in places, sure, technically more powerful in others, but soulless in a way that's hard to describe unless you've played the both. Let's rip the band-aid off. The PC and Xbox versions of Hot Pursuit 2 are just straight up inferior, and not in the pretty frame rate or graphics debate, but in the very feel of these games, the structure, the mechanics, the energy. So what's the difference? Well, here's the behind-the-scenes twist. These weren't just ports of the same game across different platforms. No, EA did something unusual. They split development. The PS2 version, developed by EA Blackbox. The Xbox and PC versions, handed off to EA Seattle, a team with a completely different design philosophy, and frankly, far less experience in the high-octane racing world. What that means in practice is you're not just looking at visual tweaks or control adjustments. You're looking at an entirely different design, from the structure of the game modes down to the very behavior of the cops and feel of the cars on the road. Let's start with the heart of any racing game, the single-player experience. I mentioned just now that you had two separate and robust career paths with over 60 events, carefully structured, a gradual ramp-up in difficulty, clear rewards, new cars unlocking at a satisfying pace. On PC and Xbox, that's gone. What you get instead is this weird stripped-down single tournament structure, with fewer events and none with the same sense of progression. It's flatter, less engaging. It feels disconnected and like you're waiting for the game to eventually drip-feed you new cars and tracks. And the worst part, there's no Hot Pursuit career, no escalating cop challenges, no sense that the heat is rising as you climb the ladder. The one thing that makes Hot Pursuit, feels like an afterthought. Now let's talk about those cops, because if there's any hill worth dying on when it comes to Hot Pursuit 2, it's that the PlayStation 2 has the best, most aggressive police AI in the franchise up to that point. They're fast, aggressive, they're coordinated, they think. On PC and Xbox? Yeah, not so much. The police here are slower, dumber, and yet somehow less aggressive and more annoying. They show up, sure, but they don't add to the tension the way that they do on PS2. And then there's the physics. Hot Pursuit 2 has this buttery smooth arcade handling. It strikes this perfect balance between weight and responsiveness. You can slide through corners with style, correct mid-slide, and every car feels distinct but manageable. It's tight, it's tactile, it makes you want to replay tracks. But hop over to PC and Xbox, and everything feels off. The cars float more, turning is sluggish, handling is slipperier. And not in a fun-to-learn way, but in a why am I sliding like I'm on glass type of way. There's a severe lack of polish to the driving model that just becomes painfully obvious once you've felt the PlayStation 2's tight and polished balance. The difference just isn't subtle. It changes how you play the game. You're fighting the car instead of flowing with it. Now, on a technical level, yeah, the PC and Xbox versions are sharper, higher resolution, better textures. If you take a screenshot, sure, they win. But visuals aren't just about fidelity, they're about atmosphere. And the PS2 and PC versions just appear different. Now, to be honest, I'm one of those people who actually doesn't entirely hate the PC appearance of the game. I don't mind how they changed up the menus and some of the artistic changes, but it's hard to deny that it just feels so much less coherent and cohesive than the PlayStation 2, which felt like this perfectly orchestrated package. Look, if you only ever played the PC or Xbox version of Hot Pursuit 2, you might have still had a good time. It's still a fairly decent racing game with exotic cars and flashing sirens. But comparison is the thief of joy here. And it's not the Hot Pursuit 2 that people remember so fondly. It's not the one that defined a generation of arcade racers. It's a version of Hot Pursuit 2, but it's not Hot Pursuit 2. And that's what I want to revisit in conclusion. Well over 20 years later, Hot Pursuit 2 remains a near timeless experience. It's a textbook's example of how simplicity and restriction can actually help hone a racing experience and harness creativity over statistics and boundless openness to create the ultimate in one specific field. An era that didn't require every racer to be a jack of all trades, and that is precisely why they've aged that well. Because you just don't get anything that executes those same concepts either at all or even close to the same degree anymore. Does it show its age in spots? Absolutely. I'd be lying right to your face if I said Hot Pursuit plays just like a modern game, and had no rough spots to frustrate you. But then again, as I said earlier in this video, name a Need for Speed that doesn't have those quirks. Hot Pursuit 2, well over 20 years later, still remains the most underrated Need for Speed. The year is 1994. Distinctive Software, a studio from my hometown best known for their production of Test Drive, was acquired by the newly reshuffled giant Electronic Arts with one simple goal: to take their plentiful experience in the realm of developing exotic racing games and create the most impressive racing game the world had yet to see. It would involve the expertise of revered automotive magazine Road and Track to match vehicle behavior and imitate vehicle sounds all the way down to individual gear levers. The game would be a technical showcase of what the realm of video games could do for the automobile. It may have been limited to a comparatively barren 8 cars and 3 point-to-point tracks, but the technological advancements that Need for Speed would bring forwards were second to no other. The final product was a knockout success, originally only developed for the scarcely popular 3DO, but in time, due to fierce demand, gaining ports to the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Microsoft computers. It was clear that Electronic Arts' acquisition had paid off, with distinctive software rebranded to EA Canada, and a pipeline of Need for Speed games which would evolve around the concept that the original 1994 release had showcased. Need for Speed was EA's golden child. Release after release, critical acclaim would grow higher and higher, and the progress made up to Porsche Unleashed in 2000 was staggering. 2001. The PlayStation 2 had taken the gaming world by storm, and in the sidelines, many publishers, including EA, looked towards how to get the most out of not only far more computing power, but a vastly larger group of customers looking for standout games. They didn't just have new hardware to work with. As to contract and test the waters on future developers, EA had signed fellow Vancouver studio Blackbox to develop Hot Pursuit 2 for the PlayStation 2. Hot Pursuit 2 was phenomenal, a cataclysmic step forwards in just what a racing game could be in comparison to its 5th generation counterparts, and critically, numerical backing to Blackbox's show-stopping first entry. So then, with an eager and passionate young studio behind the wheel of the most prominent racing game series for racing exotic cars in lavish environments, and a guaranteed moneymaker in tune, what would this collaboration entail? Need for Speed Underground would be revealed in April of 2003. Shocking, yet taking the world by storm. Over 20 years later, the legacy in which these games had left behind still remains. But today the question is then raised, why? And today, as we undergo an in-depth retrospective on the series that changed Need for Speed forever, this is Underground. In order to understand the depth of why Underground was such a culture shock, we have to take a look at what the game represented in its time. Over in Japan, plenty of racing games took narrative around that of Japanese sports cars and the tuning scene which exploded throughout 1990s Japan. In the West, these concepts didn't catch on all that well in the realm of video games until far later. The nucleus of what Western racing games media was all about encircled supercars and the exotic lifestyle. Of course, just to clarify, I'm referring to the vast majority of mainstream racing games, the kind that you'd see all over game stores at the time. It wasn't until the outrageous popularity of a small indie series whose title sounds similar to Gassed and Dubious that the media machine started firing on all cylinders. Need for Speed has always originated from exacting popular concepts to a degree that has never been seen before. It's never really been the first to supercars or any one of its styles, but instead focuses on executing that very trend to the finest degree in its genre. Right out of the gate, after Hot Pursuit 2, the desire to innovate and move on from the tried and true methodology of games past was a bold and risky decision. Underground would drop every past pretense of what Need for Speed was, all in favor of a trend that we didn't know would actually be successful. This was a different era. Games didn't take as long to develop, and therefore, risks like this were more commonplace. Now, of course, they would have to outweigh the cost of a potential sales disaster if this new identity didn't work, but there would always be next year's game if it did. Never, ever have we seen a racing series switch up its identity so far as Need for Speed did with Underground. A Supra used to be the laughingstock of the earliest games car list, and now here we are with that exact same vehicle as the highest aspiration you could have to work towards. The vibrant, exotic locations and fantasy-like stages all gone in favor of an exclusively dark, twilight setting all set throughout a single city. Police, which the anthology had become a poster child for, completely abandoned, which to this day is a choice that I've never truly agreed agreed with, but there were legitimate legal reasons behind this. Honda, in particular, was already notorious for the EK generation Civic used in the real world as cheap fun for illegal street racing, and the connotations of that same vehicle used in a street racing video game with police chases were less than favorable. So therefore, this was not feasible for Underground, and compromises had to be made to build up the game's car roster. To dissect just how both of the Underground games changed the future of this series, I want to go piece by piece, starting with that first game, and traveling all the way to the end of Underground 2. Underground 1 is a game that I grew up with. The original Hot Pursuit may have been my introduction to the franchise as a whole, but I've always had a soft spot for Underground. Before revisiting the game for this video, it had been nearly 15 years since I last played this game, with many fond memories still ingrained within me, but with a modern-day adult mindset, I found Underground 1 to be far more divisive, yet also uniquely more charming than I remembered. And without a doubt, where I found this to be the most apparent is through its mix-up in campaign. There's a brutally important piece of context that I find very important when we look back at Underground's career. The games which preceded it were very strictly gameplay focused. There were no real characters or narratives at all, simply a bunch of menus leading you to complete a career of events. Functionally, with Hot Pursuit 2, this format had easily reached its peak, at what I would say was a real impasse where it would be near impossible to improve upon this without adding in some form of a story to drape upon its gameplay skeleton. Underground was the first Need for Speed game to even have a story, and boy is it ever dated. The usage of pre-rendered CG cutscenes throughout this era of video games was exceedingly common, but for racing games, this was uncharted territory. These are incredibly complex, expensive, and data heavy, so when the choice was made for Underground's story to be presented through this fashion, there had to be limitations. In the final cut, Underground had less than 5 minutes of CG movies in total, so you really aren't going to be seeing much of them. This scarcity though certainly makes them memorable, well, as long as you can visually pick up on them through the blurry encoding format that they used. Due to the scarcity of these cinematics, the structure and plot of Underground's story couldn't be all that complex, but it's about enough to give you at least some sort of a world to wrap yourself in. Yourself, the player, start off by daydreaming and awaken to your guide through Olympic City and its racing scene, Samantha. Your goal is very simple. Take down the street racers of the city on your path to dethroning the infamous Eddie and his skyline to crown yourself the king of Olympic City. You'll have minor pauses along the way, such as Samantha getting her car stolen away, or guys like TJ who can hook you up with special parts in exchange for winning a few special events. But it's very linear and straightforward. That linearity is something that really surprised me on my second visit to Underground, as if I had to name one thing that really stuck out to me as Underground's largest downfall, is its career structure. Underground's career gameplay is at its core one of the most bare-bones and rudimentary approaches to a career the series had seen up to this point. You have a hugely overinflated 111 races to complete, which at first sounds cool as that is a lot of game on offer. But of those 111 races, the variety in gameplay is near non-existent. And once you get up to about the halfway point, an immense fatigue kicks in. This to me is Underground's largest flaw. It simply overstays its welcome to the point of making you lose love for what are some truly, really damn fun events. You have 5 main event styles: race, time trial, drift, drag, and knockout. Race is what you would expect from Need for Speed prior. You'll be dropped into a preset route in Olympic City, think the Hot Pursuit 10 but in a dense city, which you'll fight against 3 other street racers for the win. These are the main meat of what you'll be doing, and for the most part, I truly do enjoy them. As Olympic City isn't an interconnected open world, at least to the player, the tracks that can be orchestrated are so much damn fun to be racing on. You'll go through sewers, bustling metropolitan grids, flowing beautiful highways, jump across drawbridges and through laundry-laden back alleys. The track design is plenty fun until you reach that halfway point once again and, well, you've seen it all a million times. Shortcuts appear in full force, some of them being especially daring or risky, encouraging you to learn some game sense in order to calculate how to strategically use them, which I enjoyed a lot. But this certainly isn't a perfect mode. While I love a little risk in my games, how traffic is implemented in Underground defeats the purpose of fun risk. You can occasionally get hit by a traffic car, which is well and truly unavoidable in some cases, completely defunking your entire race, forcing a restart. Risk is only fun when it's dependent on skill. When you can just lose because of an unlucky car spawn, that's just poor design. Worse so is because the race routes here aren't locked off. If a traffic car pushes you between a side street that you shouldn't be racing on, your chances of winning are irrevocable. Granted, situations like this are few and far between. but not uncommon enough as to where I can't just gloss over it. Just like I will with time trials and lab knockout, because they function the same as pretty much every other in history. They're very fun modes, but again, they inherit all of the standard race types pros, and also those same cons which I just went over. Where things get funky is with drift and drag. This was the first time that these styles were implemented into a Need for Speed game, becoming absolute series staples ever since. What's different about drift events in Underground all the way up to Carbon is that they have a dramatically altered version of the game's physics model just for these events. It allows the rear wheels a highly exaggerated slip angle as if you put those McDonald's trays underneath. Now of course done not to soft lock you out of completing them, they had to make this so even front wheel drive cars can perform near on just as well as rear wheel drive vehicles. But it's always been a bit cursed. Drift events also are, as in literally every single Need for Speed review that I've mentioned, just too damn easy. You can blindfold yourself and still manage to be 100,000 points ahead of your opposition by the time your final lap is over. Thank God you can choose your difficulty for each individual event then, huh? Drag is the last bad boy to cover here, and it's always been something that I've had serious tough love with. The sense of speed and risk factor in these is second to no other, and you rarely get racing games with both drag, drift, and normal races all in one. The ability to jump over trains, which could ordinarily hit you if you missed a ramp, and dodge containers on your way to the finish line is plenty of fun, but drag is by far the single jankiest event style in the entire game. The controls are odd. Need for Speed games of this vintage locked away full player control in favor of tapping the analog stick in either direction to automatically switch lanes. This wouldn't be an issue if it didn't have the most absurd input delay you could ever imagine. And with a mode that requires you to dodge traffic cars, closed lanes, and whole trains which will knock you into next Thursday, that simply doesn't work. Flawed then are the events in Underground, but as much as I critique this game, I find just as many reasons to have a great time. What emblematizes this perfectly is how Underground 1's career progression is carried out. Underground is extremely unique in how it handles vehicles and car progression. You'll start off in a total base model Civic or Dodge Neon, and then climb your way up extremely slowly to the highest tier of cars in the game, which would be an RX-7, Supra, Skyline, all that jazz. It's very unique, as you don't feel a very typical sense of accomplishment as you progress up these tiers of vehicles. Speed is earned incrementally, and because of that, speed is due to the upgrades themselves rather than the car. Buying new cars doesn't have much gratification to it, though I will say, one of my favorite parts about how Underground handles its car progression system is the trade-in feature. At any point, you can trade in your current car and replace it with another one from the dealership, which then takes on every upgrade and visual customization bit that you've had on your existing ride. I personally love to switch up the cars that I use in racing games quite often, so this was truly a godsend, and it encourages you to try out as much of the very limited car list as possible. What's very unique though about this approach to progression, and having upgrades scale all the way up to the highest echelon of vehicles, is that you can very easily use one single car throughout the entire game if you wanted, or build up one of the starter cars right at the end when you have everything unlocked to blow the doors off of Supras and Skylines. This ability to choose your own style of gameplay and tailor the cars that you use throughout your career to so many different styles is utterly amazing. Vehicle progression though isn't the only way that the element of progress stuck with me on my Underground revisit. Once you get to the latter 20 to 30% of the career, the difficulty ramps up dramatically. Now, difficulty scaling with the player is something that I highly encourage. You're of course going to improve in both your understanding of the game's physics, shortcuts, and how to be faster in your runtime. So the AI of course should mirror this, except in Underground, they don't mirror your driving progression. They just get God mode. The physics model for the AI completely changes in the later game, allowing for them to pull off moves physically impossible for yourself to recreate. And what makes this worse is it doesn't feel natural in the slightest. You'll be cruising along to an easy breezy first place run after a near 10-minute long race, and in those final crucial corners you can spot the AI driving at the speed of light itself, blasting past you at nearly double your corner speed simply because that's what they're programmed to do if behind the player for long enough. Challenge is fun in racing games, but challenge is only fun to myself when it's down to my own skill. When challenge is down to how I can cheese the AI with artificially boosted competence to the point of comedy, it simply isn't enjoyable. So then, the campaign in Underground is certainly bold, and I very much love it for that. Despite its many flaws, it undeniably still is a brilliant time, even if I do believe that it should be around 30% shorter to help ease the repetitive nature that it wears strongly. But you see, the campaign, while a big mix-up in comparison to Need for Speed's past, what we all remember Underground for is how it changed this series' approach to car culture. The late 1990s and early 2000s were the golden ages of tuner import culture. Much of this culture did originate from Japan, but when the popularity of Japanese imports landed on the US domestic market, it was like an explosion. All throughout pop culture, the streets of cities and small-town America were full of the cheap, efficient-to-run, and easy-to-modify Japanese cars, which were heavily niche in the country's past. The monumental shift in magazines, movies, TV, the tuner scene caught the attention of North America harder than any trends that have come since. EA Blackbox weren't deaf to this, and of course, while a tremendous risk to completely ditch what the series was beforehand, there would no matter what be a guaranteed massive group of people who would flock to this cash-in on recent culture. Their mission then became, how do we completely revamp this speed engine and drop every one of the series' existing vehicles to complement this new restructuring, and on top of that, impress the millions of Need for Speed fans. Before anything, this entirely new car list had to fit this game's theme like they were destined for each other. Not many big-budget racing games, especially in the arcade racing niche, decided to have a larger fleet of, quote, normal cars. Civics, Sentras, Golf GTIs, base model WRXs, not even the STI. Blackbox clearly understood that in order to complement the tuner scene, you had to use the exact same cars that they were, and so they did. My only real criticism, apart from the very limited selection of cars, is that there are zero European vehicles at all, and what American cars do appear are strictly that of the affordable performance variety. I do see why this choice was made, but considering this was far expanded in the sequel, it seems more like a design limitation than anything else. This wasn't our ordinary hot pursuit or high stakes though, and the possibilities of what you can do to these cars had to be revolutionary. While in its predecessors, visual customization was sparse, the odd paint color choice, and that's about it as far as things went. Nah. Underground was for the tuners, so you had to be able to make your cars stylish. Underground's customizability surprisingly holds up relatively well even to this day. The plethora of bumpers, skirts, wheels, and wings were only just the surface of Underground's personalized approach. You could toss on neon underglow, swap headlights and taillights, change exhaust tips, paint your engine's accents and brake calipers, and to drape atop of all of this, one of the most versatile vinyl and decal editors of its time period. This customizability wasn't limited just to visuals, but under the hood as well. You want to put a giant turbo on an EK Civic and turn it into a drag machine? Go on ahead. From engine to nitrous, suspension, brake upgrades, which, by the way, actually affect the appearance of your physical rotors and calipers. And as I mentioned earlier, you have so much freedom in which cars you want to build for any point in your career, providing you have it unlocked. Have enough of both customization styles and you'll earn your right a seat on multiple magazine covers throughout your career. A pretty damn fun way to build a connection to a specific build or car, something that this game does better than many others, even in the modern day. So the cars fit Underground's theming like a tailored glove, and the modifications you can perform have impressed even through the test of time. But this is a 20-year-old game now, so how do they play? In short, absolutely wonderful. Underground's physics never needed to change all that much from Hot Pursuit 2 beforehand. Granted, the change in environments would require some tweaking and polish to make it feel natural, and that they do. There's a beautiful sense of ease and cars that feel fleet of foot. I've grown accustomed to Need for Speed games having obnoxious input delay, but when you go back to this era of more simplistic arcade physics which were tailored exclusively to accentuate the thrill of high-speed driving, rather than simulating a more realistic model, this input delay is non-existent. Vehicles are so responsive, but they don't feel exactly the same as each other either. The differences between all three drivetrain layouts is clear-cut, with a distinct push and pull of front or rear-wheel drive focused powertrains. Weight, while never including any heavy hitters in the kart list, is enough to feel the difference between a nimble Integra Type R and a Supra which is over 1,000 pounds heavier. All of these elements were included to not make Underground feel too simplistic. What it is though, is a more fun and lighthearted take on typical driving characteristics, and that's an approach that I feel matches the rest of this game to a T. The last realm of Underground's approach to vehicles that needs just as large of a spotlight is a tremendous step up in audio production. The lead audio chief Charles Deenan had an interview with IGN back when the game was first releasing, divulging many of the tricks and tribulations that the team went through in the development process. I'll leave a link to the full interview in the description, but I do want to point out the most standout lines. Going from PlayStation 1 to the vastly more powerful PlayStation 2 allowed developers to ditch the old chip-generated sounds in favor of handcrafted audio, as the technology finally had the memory for large format audio files. This meant that dyno runs were used to capture the essence of each one of Underground's cars, a seemingly outrageous task but made possible due to the limited car list size and EA's monetary backing. The Skyline in particular was notorious to record due to the turbocharger's induction noise, causing for far more of an airy tone than they wanted to show off in-game. Of course, raw dyno footage wasn't going to cut it, so they were edited and spruced up to give a very punchy yet broad spectrum of engine sounds in which to bless the ears of the player. I honestly still believe that some of the sounds hold up very well today. The formatting itself clearly is less polished than what we've come to expect with modern technology, but the raw sounds themselves, they really get the blood pumping. Audio is great and all, in terms of your vehicle sounds, but what helped carry Underground 1 to its iconographic status, and arguably helped reinforce its tone and atmosphere better than anything else, is its soundtrack. The late 90s and early 2000s were simply iconic for the countless bangers that dropped constantly, and Underground handpicked some of the best. While primarily spotlighting the best of hip-hop and electronic music, you'd be hard-pressed to find at least 10 songs in this soundtrack that you wouldn't blast at 110% volume speeding down Olympic City. Of course, I can't go very in-depth due to the copyright of the licensed music, and truthfully, even if I could, I'm no music aficionado. I just know a good soundtrack when I hear it. And Underground isn't far off from being one of the single greatest racing game soundtracks of all time. Now, to throw some more important context on Underground's name, it would be a crucial mistake not to mention just how much this one game influenced not just Need for Speed's entire future, but the arcade racer. Underground was, of course, a knockout commercial success, and years after its launch, countless games took inspiration to capitalize on this new genre norm. Most prominently in my mind are Juiced 1 and 2. Nothing, though, comes close to how this game changed the future and expectations of what Need for Speed would come to be even in the modern day. You see, Underground was so big for this series that there are plenty of people I know who are fully convinced that these games serve as the, quote, true beginning of this franchise. Now, this is not a take that I side with, but on some levels I do see where the argument comes from. Just looking at the next releases, Underground 2, Most Wanted, Carbon. None of these games would have existed without the initial step that Underground 1 took. The huge discrepancy in popularity of the first 5 entries in comparison to the Underground to Carbon era is staggering, so I can't fully fault that mindset even though it is a very one-sided view of the series. This same view in turn has led to a hell of a paradox. Underground sparked an era of Need for Speeds so good, I'd argue the series has virtually zero chance of reaching the same glory ever again. This era was lightning in a bottle, a perfect moment in time that cannot be replicated in the modern day. This is why I've been one of the larger critics of the Ghost era of Need for Speed games, because while they do absolutely have their own merits, it was clear that this was a last-ditch effort of attempting to recreate the same success and style of a lot of the Blackbox era games through a modern lens. Underground only succeeded because of risks. Risks that had to be made to surprise everyone. With a game that no one could say that they've played anything like before. I love Need for Speed, but I hate seeing the series live in the shadow of its own former glory out of fear of risk, even though that same risk is what led it to become one of the most famous racing titles in history. Need for Speed Underground, especially in 2024, is not by any means a perfect game. It's flawed, far more strongly than I remembered, but to the same level, carries such a heavy persona and energy that cannot ever be replicated. Its style, music, of the era theming hold up brilliantly. It's aged, yes, no question, but it hasn't aged poorly. Underground will, and always will be, the quintessential 2000s tuner time capsule, and that alone is enough for me to still hold a strong sense of adoration for it. It's hard to imagine now, in a world where EA's branding machine runs like a metronome. But Need for Speed Underground was a gamble, a rebranding effort so drastic, so violently disconnected from the series' glossy roots and exotic car fantasy, that it nearly felt like a spin-off. Gone were the Lamborghinis and sweeping European vistas. In came the street grime, the JDM underdogs, the glowstick aesthetics and midnight mayhem. And it worked. Underground was a thunderclap, a commercial and cultural juggernaut that turned a niche into a movement. EA Blackbox, the Canadian studio that had proved their mettle with the release of Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, was tucked inside EA's sprawling structure, and they hit gold. So naturally, the pressure to follow it up was immediate. But not just follow up, surpass, expand, and monetize the mood. The team didn't want to just make Underground 1.5. They'd done the whole linear progression thing. Static menu is a race-by-race unlocks. A garage is a holding pen. It had all worked, and in moments I do prefer the snappy, quickly paced race-to-race style of the original Underground, but it felt like a snapshot. Too small for the energy that they were channeling. For the sequel, the directive was clear. Bigger, but bigger in a way that felt meaningful. Not just more races, but more context, more world. This was the age of open worlds blossoming into mainstream design dogma. GTA 3 had kicked the door open in 2001, and by 2004, San Andreas was about to drop a thermonuclear bomb on everyone's expectations of what a video game map could be. EA was not blind to that, and the writing was on the wall. If you wanted to feel modern, you had to go open. And so they built Bayview, a stitched-together Frankenstein's monster of tuner culture hotspots. From palm-lined beaches to misty industrial sprawl. It wasn't just a track list anymore. It was a city with no pedestrians, no traffic rules, no real inhabitants beyond your rivals. But that wasn't the point. Bayview existed to feel like a space that you had conjured. It was the world's longest, most glorified racetrack disguised as an urban sandbox. Bayview may not be the first racing game open world. Games such as Midnight Club pioneered that concept years before, but they never quite took the same approach. Nor, if you're asking me, had the same influence as that of Underground 2. And building that city was no small feat. Development was fast and aggressive. EA, flush with Underground 1's success, pumped resources into the sequel, but with that came expectations. Commercial ones. This wasn't just a team chasing a vision anymore. It was a team navigating a highway with goal markers far higher than ever expected. The devs had to walk a tightrope between authenticity and spectacle, realism and fantasy. Too grounded, and you alienate the escapists. Too fictional, and you lose the credibility of the scene that you're trying to emulate. Their solution? Embrace excess. Stylize everything. Let realism drift out of the corner and slam into a pole. If the physics weren't accurate, who cares? They felt good. If the customization options were absurd, good. That's the point. The real tuner world might scoff at spinner rims and the neon tire glow, but Blackbox knew their audience wasn't purists. It was kids with dreams, teenagers scribbling body kits in the backs of notebooks. People who wanted to drive their identity, not just a car. The core of Underground 2's design was built on that adolescent rush of self-expression. The creative leads weren't just asking, how do we make this fun to drive? They were asking, how do we make this feel like yours? Personalization and pushing past what the original Underground gave the player for personalizing their rides was priority, and that led to one of the most exhaustive customization systems ever implemented in a racing game. Hood scoops, engine tuning, vinyl layering, neon underglow, audio setups, magazine covers. It was all there, not just for performance, but for personality, for ego. The garage became a reflection chamber, a place where every mod and sticker applied brought you closer to some imagined version of yourself that you couldn't be in real life. It was chaotic, in a way only early 2000s culture could be. This was the Y2K aesthetic on overdrive, tech-heavy, over-designed, almost alien in that design. The UI was flickering holograms and GPS pulses. Loading screens pulsed like a trance club. Menus weren't clean. They were busy, like club flyers stapled to telephone poles. Information was buried in layers, and that was okay, because style trumped clarity. But this game wasn't built in a vacuum. The developers had reference points. They studied tuner magazines. They pored over Fast and Furious DVDs. They listened to the way that people talked about their builds, the pride, the obsession. They didn't just want to gamify cars. They wanted to gamify belonging. And yet this wasn't an indie passion project. It was a corporate sequel, and it carried the usual footprints. EA wanted monetizable hooks, hence the sponsored product placement. Best Buy garages, singular wireless ads, SUV events that felt completely divorced from the game's aesthetics. None of these decisions were accidents. They were business. And the weird part? It somehow worked. Despite all of the branding sludge, Underground 2 retained its soul. What at the time may have seemed shoehorned in for product placement, now is a time capsule of an era long gone, in all its unusually charming standoutness. That's a testament to EA Blackbox's vision. Under the weight of corporate oversight, the team still made something weird and personal, something messy and lovable. Perfect? No, God, far from it. But memorable in a way not just different from the original Underground, not just enough to hold its own identity in an echo chamber, but in a way that superseded both to become one of the most influential and highly revered racing games of all time. They couldn't control everything, of course. Some features were cut. Some systems never fully matured. Game modes cut. In fact, 5 entirely new event types planned for Underground 2's release were abandoned. The first one being Tournament, which were basically just simply groups of standard events, much like the original Underground. Second was Burnout, which was also planned to be in the original Underground and scrapped there. Really just never wanted to make it out, huh? Next was Knockout, also in the original Underground. The most interesting to me, ironically one that we know the least about, was called Car Show, which I'd assume just got reworked into those magazine show-offs in the final product. But I'm curious to see what that would have been like as a more fleshed out event. The last and most unknown is called GT. That's all we know. Maybe another variant of Tournaments, one with higher stakes, but who's to say? The open world, while groundbreaking, was ultimately conceptually brilliant and revolutionary, janky as all sin. The story, threadbare, and the voice acting, well, let's just say Brooke Burke wasn't about to win a BAFTA. But none of that mattered, because what they did control, they poured everything into. So yes, the game was built fast. EA gave them just about a year from green light to gold master. That's barely enough time to tune a car, let alone an entire city. But they did it. They took the bones of Underground 1 and built something that didn't just expand, but evolved. Underground 2 wasn't perfect, but it wasn't trying to be. What it was alive. A feeling that you just can't patch in after the fact. Now, before I get too deep into things, I want to do some quick housekeeping. I hate plugging myself, but I know that there's plenty of you who would love to help support these videos and keep them coming. So I wanted to remind y'all that I do indeed have a Patreon, which I'll leave a link to in the description if you want to get early access to previews of videos and updates directly from me. As well as that, the lunatics over at GamerSupps somehow decided it was a good idea to give me fuel to keep editing these videos. Like, jokes aside, these flavors hit, and a creator code? Bad idea, guys. Seriously. Now I've got my friends buying cups to make them look like Discord mods. If you're as depraved as they are, you can use my code Ultraviolet to pick up a waifu cup, but for the love of God, stick to some ethical gooning. Better yet, pick up one of those pixel cups instead, or some of their merch. That's enough YouTuber BS for me. I want to genuinely extend a huge thank you to existing patrons and GamerSupps for being killer to work with. So let's get right back to the video. For me, the perfect piece of Underground 2 that demonstrates its immediate sense of innovation, while also showcasing that same eagerness also left ideas rough around the edges, is the map. I want to start with the good, because it really is true that games like Underground 2 and Midnight Club were what gave life to open worlds in racing games, and paved the path to the modern day where, you can't find basically any big-name AAA racing games that aren't open world. That aren't track racers, of course. The utilization of Bayview was awesome. The city itself served as your menus to access the game's features. Want a new race? Drive to it. Want to customize? Head to the garage. Want to find a sponsor event? Better start looking around. It was split into a collection of 5 interlocked districts, each with their own aesthetic fingerprint. Beacon Hill, your suburban starting line, all sleepy corners and downtown wannabe nightlife. Jackson Heights, high-altitude serpentines and perpetual fog, hiding technical turns behind foliage and mystery. And honestly, all while looking like the real original concept for Need for Speed Carbon. Cole Harbor, industrial veins pulsing with danger, all steel bridges and claustrophobic underpasses. The airport, city core, the ever-looping freeways between them. It was a labyrinth, one that you had fun learning. At first, it felt slow. You found instant access to idling and backstreets trying to find your next location. But over time, repetition becomes rhythm, streets become second nature. You learned Bayview not through quest markers or fast travel, but through muscle memories. It was the kind of world that didn't need to be massive to feel meaningful. It just needed to be yours. But is it flawless? Haha. God, far from it. Let's talk about the layout, because while I love the idea of how the multitude of districts in Bayview are laid out, there is a massive glaring flaw which puts a tremendous dampener on my overall thoughts of the map as a whole, and it's the highway setup. Navigating on and off the freeway requires a whole PhD in Bayview. It is utterly ridiculous some of the stunts that you have to pull just to navigate off the freeway to get to objectives. Let me point out with the mouse here the route that you have to go, just to hop off of the freeway, without the existence of any shortcuts or extra off-ramps. No, it's just far too locked in and straight cut, and far from the only area of the game's map that suffers from this issue. You know what it reminds me of? A more cluttered and less grid-like version of Burnout Paradise's map. They both allow you to within reason make your own routes in certain events with goal markers around their worlds, and run into a lot of the same problems because of that. However, the main differentiator is Paradise at least has a plethora of different branching paths that lead you to the same spot. Underground 2 feels like it was trying for that same feeling, though of course just years earlier and, well, far more linear and less freeing. And the end result, while ambitious and revolutionary at the time, feels more messy than anything in the modern day. And this is a shame too, because while there are some qualities that Bayview brought forth that I've yet to see another racing game open world do quite as well. Let's talk signage. You can absolutely blast through Bayview, and yet you can count on plenty of road sign signposts to make it very clear where highways lead to, where a paint shop you may not have discovered may lie, and of course, where the districts lead to. Now yes, while the signage is clear and built for racing, it doesn't change what I just mentioned about the map still being a cluttered mess in critical spots. But God, if I can't bring myself to completely hate it. It's flawed, it's groundbreaking, and it's just very impressionable. I mean, think about how many times you'll pass by the fountain shortcut by the casinos, the canyons you'll drift down, the 100 times you'll slam into the train car during drag races by the airport. Love it? I can't completely. Loathe it? I can't say that either. It's the best and worst of Underground 2 all in one, and definitely not the only part of the game like that. If there's something apart from the map that I'd argue that, while creative, was a definite blight, especially as time has gone on, is the career in Underground 2. Look, I remember this far more fondly than in actuality, probably due to how unique the comic style presentation is, especially for the time period. But once you look past that, and look closer, and the glue and the connective tissue between them just doesn't click. I'm the first one to admit that Underground 1 is far from perfect, what with its drawn-out pacing at moments, heavy difficulty spikes, and eccentric CGI cutscenes. And even then, it somehow remained more consistent and engaging. Let me try and go through and explain. The game picks up where Underground 1 left off. You're fresh off your victory, the nameless driver who toppled the city's racing hierarchy. But glory doesn't last long. The opening FMV sets the tone. You're betrayed, set up, run off the road, courtesy of one Caleb Reese, a villain so cartoonishly smug he might as well twirl a vinyl wrap mustache. Your car, your rep, your place in the world, all gone, left in the dust, and from their wreckage begins the climb. This is Underground 2's coming-of-age story. Not a tale of a street racer ascending to fame, but one of clawing back what was stolen. A fun twist and reversal of what Underground represented. And that hunger permeates the entire campaign, narratively complementing the idea of earning reputation that was lost, style through your car, the identity and personality ripped away at the start, lending it a ludonarrative harmonic touch that the original Underground didn't excel at to the same degree. Bayview isn't a playground anymore, it's a narrative canvas. The city itself becomes your arena of revenge, parceled out district by district as you claw your way back into relevance. Each area begins closed off, hostile, unwelcoming. You have to prove yourself, not just in races, but in presence and style that your rider claims. And that's both a blessing and a curse here, because while yes, the progression to style point system is great on paper, Underground 2 quite literally asks you to turn your cars into a Y2K time capsule of Monster Energy flavored vomit blobs just to get enough style points to unlock new areas. And don't get me started on the final acts of the game and how egregious the things that you have to do to your car are. Look at the one I used to finish the game in. Yeah, this is just not it. The story isn't told through long dialogue sequences or cinematic cutscenes. Instead, it's fed through voicemails, text messages, and whispers in the underground, alongside, of course, the comic strips. A network of sponsors, allies, and informants who nudge you along, most important among them being Rachel. She's your fixer, your guide, your disembodied voice telling you which races to care about and which upgrades to chase. The irony is, she never really does anything, but she feels present, like a friend watching your back. And in a game where you're otherwise a lone wolf in an empty city, her voice matters more than the script she's reading. And then there's Caleb, the big bad, the head of the Street Reapers, Bayview's reigning racing crew. He's not a character so much as a symbol, the face of everything arrogant, corporate, and hollow about tuning culture. His SUV is practically a metaphor in itself, bulky, over-designed, obnoxious, yet undeniably powerful. He doesn't haunt you through dialogue. He doesn't need to. His presence lingers in the city, in the locked doors and the gate-kept races, until finally, you build enough momentum to call him out. But that sounds far more dramatic than in reality. Because if I'm honest, he's kinda one of the most forgettable antagonists in Need for Speed's history. I think a big part of this is the presentation of the narrative here. At least with the CGI sequences of Underground, you get a more apt display of these characters' personality and flair, even if it was a bit cartoonish and comical. With the comic sequences, they feel a bit rushed. They did only, after all, have a year between the two games, so that would easily serve as a reason as to why they took this creative approach, simply hiding development costs and time through another form of presentation. But the result is that genuinely, even after playing through this game twice, I legitimately forgot the name of the antagonist, and what even happens throughout the story, even though it's only been 2 weeks since finished the game and writing this point in the script. Look, I read manga, so the style isn't the issue, and hell, even newer games such as JDM and Motorstorm Apocalypse prove that this can be executed well. In Underground 2, it just wasn't to the fullest extent if you're asking me. The campaign culminates in one last sprint against Caleb, a mano-a-mano throwdown that serves as your exorcism. Beat him and Bayview is yours again. And I'm gonna be honest, it sucks. Look, at the end of the day, I love Underground 2, but this is one of the most lame, lackluster, and forgettable final races in Need for Speed. It's not just that Caleb sucks, but there's almost no natural build-up, no iconic car to chase after and win. It's just kinda blah. So you combine that with the stupendously drawn-out final act of the game, and yeah, I can't exactly say I love the way this game concludes at all. What Underground 2 lacks in dialogue and story, it certainly compensates for in structure. And with that being said, I want to talk about the gameplay of the career here. If you played the original Underground, then you're pretty much getting the same here. Races and drag play virtually identically, though with the addition of these street cross events, which honestly kinda suck. They're just normal races on drift tracks pretty much, and your nitrous is taken away, mixed with the AI being its absolute worst, and yeah, there really is very much to like about them. Drift does have some really cool new features, such as the mountain drift sprint, which it's pretty clear and cut we're testing the waters for carbon. They're great, but apart from those though, if you play drift events in one Need for Speed, you've basically played them all. Stupid easy, not much to them, but they're a fun change of pace from just racing constantly. What sets Underground apart, if you're asking me, is when you're not competing in the traditional sense. Most prominently, the magazine events. Sure, they can be a bit of a maze to get around the map sometimes, but the reward is one of the coolest tie-ins of the era car culture ever. The ability to pose and show off your builds to your heart's content. Sure, some of these magazine or DVD covers will be scripted and just use your build in a set position, but others, man, you choose everything. From the speed of the roller, if you want your doors open, wheel position. That was creativity. The kind that you just don't see in this day and age. And a great improvement on an otherwise pretty mediocre concept in the original Underground. There's a few more small little notes, both good and bad, that I wanted to add at the end here. First, I don't know if this is just results of the game running on modern hardware, but I had the AI just fall from the ceiling quite a few times. Roaming races are a feature which, while cool, I guess, I wish were tied into the narrative and core loop a bit more. It's really unclear just how important they are, and would have been neat to see them turned into mini-bosses or something. Lastly, the tracks themselves lack a lot of the jank of Underground 1. What with its inconsistent jumps and hills, side streets that you could accidentally get pushed into, and replaced with these new series famous arrows dropping off diverging routes, leading to a far less frustrating experience overall in Underground 2. I also look towards aspects such as sponsors. Great idea. Super neat. Except for the fact that I just felt no damn difference and honestly forgot they existed until the game would tell me that I unlocked a new one. So in the end, a step forwards, in many ways, yeah. But the actualization of concept vision to end result is, if you're asking me, just not as strong as the original Underground's linearity. That game was addictingly snappy and fast-paced. Lost some steam near the end, yes, but was far more consistent. Underground 2 was far more risky, and in many ways that paid off. I mean, come on, the diversity of content here. There's even racetracks built into the main career, something plenty of other open-world racers took decades to incorporate. But in plenty of other ways, this game has hampered itself from true greatness. If Underground 2 is remembered for one thing above all else, it isn't the open world, the villain, or even the soundtrack. It's the customization and dedication to the ultimate street racing fantasy. The dizzying, unashamedly maximalist approach to tuning a car into your car. This was the crown jewel, the reason the game still burns neon bright in the collective memory of a generation. Before Underground, car customization in mainstream racing games was largely a matter of performance. It was about efficiency, shaving seconds, becoming competitive. But Blackbox realized something revolutionary. In the tuner scene, performance is only half the story. The other half? Identity. And so they built an upgrade and customization system that didn't just make your car faster, it made it yours. And in ways nothing else dares to try. Custom gauges for the UI, nitrous purges, hydraulics, tints, and neon galore, scissor doors, split hoods, trunk audio system setups. And then you could still go wild with performance parts, choose brands to suit the make and model, chuck your ride on a dyno and perfect it for different styles, go nuts with a vinyl editor, and then go blast Rise Against on your way to the next event in this world. Nothing even came close to Underground 2's personalization. The game never once laughed at you for picking clashing colors or over-the-top mods. It leaned in. It said, yeah, go nuts. And in that acceptance, you found freedom. The car list itself was pretty good. But if I'm being honest, I really do wish it did more to differentiate itself from the first game. And while the addition of SUVs was neat, I guess, they wound up being pretty useless. I personally would have loved to have seen the addition of far more sports cars, not even anything crazy like Lamborghini or Ferrari, but Porsches, Corvettes, and the more attainable dream car crowds would have fit the theme of expanding on the first game so much more, and just provided a more engaging car list as a whole. But I suppose at the end of the day, that torch was passed to Most Wanted. The cars then, a beautiful way to act as a metaphor for what Underground 2's mission was. Be more, do more, but still at the end of the day, be underground. And that's where I want to transition to my conclusion. Need for Speed Underground 2 isn't a perfect game, but it's a special one. What makes it stand out even after all of these years isn't its story or its racing physics. It's the way it captured a moment in time. The early 2000s obsession with tuner culture, neon, and the self-expression on four wheels was bottled up and turned into something that you can play. Something that you could be a part of. The open world of Bayview wasn't the most detailed and the most alive, but it gave you a sense of freedom that was rare for racing games back then. The customization system was over the top, sometimes messy, but it gave everyone the chance to make a car that felt like their own. And the races themselves, whether sprints, circus, or drifting through the mountains, tied it all together. Other racing games have been faster, prettier, and more technologically advanced, but very few have managed to hit the same balance between performance and personality. And that's why Underground 2 still comes up in conversations about the best entries in the series. It wasn't about winning races, it wasn't about being perfect. It was about having fun with cars, about expression, and living inside a particular style of street racing fantasy. Looking back, Underground 2 still feels like lightning in a bottle, a game that couldn't have existed before its time and hasn't been replicated since. That's why people still remember it, and why it continues to matter as an imperfect icon. Most Wanted. What two words hold more reverence and weight in the realm of driving games? Most Wanted needs no introduction. By a long shot, the most popular Need for Speed of all time, selling over 18 million copies, available on 8 separate platforms, a cover that has become an iconographic poster child for the series as a whole, and has been host to endless discussions, arguments, and fanfare for 20 years. 2025 marks the 2-decade anniversary of one of the most influential racing games ever made. And in celebration, I wanted to bring forth my perspective on everything Most Wanted, starting all the way from the drafting room, the development, the original 2005 PlayStation 2 release, the ports, how the game has aged and plays in the modern day on current hardware, the disastrously messy reboot, and the development nightmares which left ripples through the series' last decade, alongside just what it means to hold such a powerful legacy. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you into my deep dive of 20 years of Most Wanted. The end game that we know today as Most Wanted has, to say the very least, a fascinating origin story full of twists and concepts. It's important to remember that in the 2 years before Most Wanted's release, Underground had taken reign of pop culture. It was the hottest thing in racing, heavily customizable street racing, with a focus on the tuner scene, revolving almost entirely around automotive trends of that era. I covered this very topic far more in depth in my Underground review, but long story short, Underground reinvented Need for Speed forever, with Underground 2 involving this concept even further. But you can only do the same concept so many times, and so the torch was passed onto the development of the next game, to take this new identity for the series, and what clearly worked with fans and critics alike, but changed things up dramatically. Believe it or not, the game that we'd come to know as Most Wanted started as a concept for Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 3, most likely with the addendum of the subtitle Most Wanted at the end. From what I can gather, development of what I'd call the Most Wanted project started as early as an undeterminable time in 2003, the same year that the original Underground released. It would of course bring something back to the series that had been missing since Hot Pursuit 2, police, being an essential part of the game's new tone and theming as a whole. Something that I find fascinating about the original concept for Most Wanted is the fact that the map was originally supposed to have a very snowy alpine feel. A fact that, well, as should be obvious by now, did not translate in the slightest to the final build, and the only semblance of which is known to the public is a concept drift track, something that I'll visit later on. Something that did, however, was that Hot Pursuit DNA. While yes, of course very different to Hot Pursuit 2 on a fundamental level, much of the game's originating concept art and spots of the final game's world design lean very heavily into the aesthetics that Hot Pursuit emblematized, bringing back exotic cars and more lavish locales in comparison to the Underground duology's concrete labyrinths, though that's not the most prominent theme Most Wanted would share with Hot Pursuit. As I mentioned, police would be returning, and the implementation of which would not only be by far the most in-depth inclusion of police in a Need for Speed game at the time, but arguably even to this day near on 2 decades later. By now, I'm sure that most of you would be familiar with pursuit breakers, but in the shoes of someone popping Most Wanted into their PS2 after their most recent Need for Speeds had no police at all, this concept was utterly revolutionary. The environment of Most Wanted would incorporate destructible segments, which would serve as countermeasures for fighting back on an offensive level mid-pursuit. Pursuit breakers were essential from early development, gameplay moments regarding them being some of the most fascinating concept art for the game that's known. So ambitious in fact that plenty of concepted gameplay drafts regarding them had to be scrapped, presumably down to time constraints. My favorite example being the very different to release version of the oil refinery, with interactable cranes to knock over and oil barrels to cause slicks. This isn't the only example of cut pursuit breakers, however, as there was a whole junk construction yard subject to the map which never made it past concepting, which included large concrete tubes you could leap through, and car compactors that you could activate mid-chase to, well, pancake police. Very extreme. At this early stage, there was a pre-rendered trailer which got across a vision that, surprisingly, doesn't look all that far away from the end result, albeit with a very different choice of vehicle which was likely changed because of the new identity the Most Wanted project would take on. It's pretty clear by now that Most Wanted was going for a far more bombastic, almost Hollywood action movie-esque experience through the gameplay here, but this was ever present in the initial vision for the narrative as well. Some of the earlier storyboarding portraying Highscape's escapades with a Lamborghini Murcielago, enhanced by the mixing of cinematic transitions from cutscene to gameplay. Oh, and it wasn't subtle either. We're talking jumping that same Murcielago over a flock of Apache helicopters in the game's Grand Canyon. Subtlety was far from priority here. To complement the narrative that they were going for, the characters designed for the original version of the game are very arguably the aspect which changed the most in the final build. There seemed to be a far larger focus on them, perhaps giving more time to fleshing out each one's origin backstory, with each one having their own quotes to give off a unique persona, although that's pure speculation just based on how well thought out these concepts are. These characters and cinematics would also completely ditch the presentation found in either Underground, what with the CGI pre-rendered sequences and comic books being ill-fitted or too budget-intensive to articulate the intricate personalities and models of those original visions. And so the choice was made for the first time in series history to include FMVs recorded with real actors and cars. All that budget from Underground sales success was clearly paying dividends, hiring professional actors, directors, and cutting-edge VFX artists to combine the real world and the streets of Rockport to a degree far stronger than the series had ever done before. This really was when EA actually put the art in Electronic Arts. They may have aged in a fascinating manner, but it's undeniable that no matter how you feel about them, they're unapologetically of the era, It's here we notice the largest shift in tone compared to earlier drafts. This was of course a sequel to Underground, which thrived off of the late 90s car culture permeating the automotive scene. Most Wanted simply didn't have the chance to risk too much, straying too far from what made those games so loved and pertinent. And so over time, the theming would incorporate much of the era's pop culture to replace the more straight and narrow styling of a traditional Hot Pursuit, as example. This is shown really well through the evolution of the game's logo, gradually becoming less angular and sharp, to be radical, loose, and in your face. Though the best example of fusion through the Hot Pursuit DNA and the open world concepts that Underground brought forth to the series is through the map of Most Wanted. The most immediate difference from Underground, which was easy to see straight from the drafting room, was the sense of freedom and open air. I adore Underground 2's map and what it did for the genre in 2004, but it's very claustrophobic at times due to the concrete jungle locale. Rockport would be far more varied, not shying away from continuing to maintain a gritty industrial feel at spots, but breaking that up through spots of countryside, reminiscent of Hot Pursuit's more freeing trackside views, which certainly mirror well in the final product. And to tie it all together, being far more interactive with the use of pursuit breakers, hideout spots, and bucket loads of shortcuts to memorize your advantage. The stage was set for November of 2005, and while Blackbox certainly would have pictured the game doing well, I don't think anyone knew just how big what they had on their hands was. 18 million copies. I want to revisit that number because I don't think most people understand just how crazy that it is. Now of course, that 18 million is lifetime sales, not just taking into account 2005. But for context, I want to look at other games in the same year to showcase just how insane this is. Let's start with a little video game you might have heard of called Resident Evil 4. Easily one of the most famous and revered games ever made, that's also been re-released on many a different platform. When combining all platforms that it released on, it only reaches 12.3 million units sold, a mere 2/3 of what Most Wanted was able to cover. God of War, one of the most important and recognizable franchises, got its start in 2005, and to date, that 2005 entry has only sold 4.6 million units, almost a quarter of Most Wanted. A little lightning round of other 2005 games, shall we? Kingdom Hearts 2, 4.7 million copies. Devil May Cry 3, 1.3 million. Shadow of the Colossus, approximately 1 million. Other racing games you may add. Midnight Club 3 on all platforms is around 5 million copies, with numbers for that being pretty hard to accurately source. You'd have to go back to the previous year's Gran Turismo 4, widely agreed to be one of the greatest racing games of all time, to get a fair shot. And even then, sales didn't even cross 12 million units. Now why am I going on about numbers here? We all know that the game's been successful. I bring this up to show off the fact that even in an era of relentless competition, where new franchises were coming up everywhere, Need for Speed Most Wanted gave all of them a reality check as to what racing games could be. It didn't just appeal to car people and to racing game people, despite being a very proud and boastful racing game. But why is that? It's because the experience that Most Wanted gave you had appeal. Even those who didn't play racing games saw that box on store shelves, saw the trailers and advertisements and went, damn, that looks like fun. Most Wanted appealed to the general masses not by dumbing down its mechanics in a false attempt to lure inexperienced players in because of accessibility and ease of play, but because it brought an experience to the table that was so badass you had to give it a shot. It's the total antithesis of what many a modern racing game tries to do in order to lure in the general public, by watering these games down, leaving long-term players feeling abandoned and unheard, and new players bored after the first few hours because everything's either been handed to them, or they have to spend the next 3 years of their life logging into some live service every week like a chore that they never wanted to commit to in the first place. So what then? What made this experience resonate with so many people? Well, it's more than just lightning in a bottle. What's aged better than anyone would think is just how pickup and playable Most Wanted is. There's a short amount of effort needed in order to have a great time. And while the game may be functionally so different from it, it shares something brilliant with my favorite Need for Speed, Hot Pursuit. Both of these games have what's a very short list of requirements needed to get right into the game and either do a Hot Pursuit, work on the career, or even if you just have 5 minutes to spare to pop off a quick race. These games make that easy to do, over and over and over again. A huge priority of these games is not spending your time in menus or building cars and collections that you're not going to give a rat's ass about for 99% of your playthrough. You want fun? Great. Hop on and spend 30 to 45 minutes knocking off a member of the blacklist, because the amount of satisfaction and minute progress that you'll make in that time is second to virtually none. I want to move on to a little more of a visual topic, and that's the art direction and visual presentation of Most Wanted. Now heads up, all of the more modern footage is recorded on my rig running the Most Wanted Redux mod. The reason that I went with this is because it keeps the original intent and styling of the game's visuals just spruced up a little bit. And with that being said, the only word that I can really give you to describe this game's art direction is striking. Think about it. No matter how you may feel about this game's art design, have you ever met anyone who's felt neutral or indecisive on it? I'm willing to bet that's very unlikely, as no matter where you look, all sides of the argument are very passionate. That strength in tone is why the stylistic direction of this game is so notable. It contrasts so strongly from both Undergrounds that came before it and Carbon which built off it. The heavily filtered bleach pie pass approach to the filtering of Most Wanted was, as you probably expect, very intentional. The visuals were, according to the director, created specifically to invoke a more serious, less inviting look of that which Underground emblematized. Grunge, grit, browns, and desaturated tones were all pieces which help contrast the clean, vibrant resplendence of Underground, especially 2. This game just screams Y2K, edginess, and danger, even looking away from things such as the color palette and general direction, towards fonts, graphics, character portraits, and menus. It's kinda designed to piss you off. And that's what I love about it. Sure, I understand why the obnoxious tone just doesn't click with everyone. I really do. And can I claim that it's aged well? Well, not in a typical sense. Could Most Wanted go on sale today and blend in as well as, say, Hot Pursuit 2 could have? Hell no. This is a proud hallmark of the 2000s, and that's what I respect about it. It may not have aged as well as Hot Pursuit 2, but which one's art direction is talked about more to this day? I don't think I need to answer that for you. You know what else remains a straight time capsule of this era, and adds tenfold to the atmosphere and tone that Most Wanted boasted? The soundtrack. Now look, I'm not going to pull the same lazy beating a dead horse bit that, the old Need for Speed music is better than new, because while there's some merit there, I'm not feeding into an argument fed by some of the most childish toxicity known to man, fed by arguments which have no underlying basis apart from talking on each other's music tastes. But I will be the one to point out how perfect for Most Wanted that this soundtrack was. Danger, rebellion, and adrenaline. All 3 of these fundamental themes of the game were told through its music. When you're in the menus, you get mostly hip-hop, as you rebel against the norm and tune and customize your cars. As you race, metal and rock blast to keep your heart rate up and adrenaline pumping. And while in police pursuits, danger and risk is instilled through the original compositions, which will dynamically change based on what stage of the pursuit you're in. That level of ingenuity is something that I find the series has lost a lot of its spark for. And again, I'm not talking about the music or songs themselves, but how they're implemented into the theming of the narrative and game as a whole. Most Wanted shaped so much of my music taste, being one of my first introductions to Bullet for My Valentine, Disturbed, and Cell Dweller. Yeah, this game is the total catalyst for my new metal obsession, come to think of it. Now, I shouldn't have to explain that because it's a Y2K time capsule, how's it aged? Well, about the same as the rest of this game's presentation. If we're talking the tracklist itself, yeah, no, this is pure 2000s. But the utilization of that tracklist is utterly timeless, and a beautiful example of how essential music can be to establishing a game's tone. Now moving on, I've talked a fair bit through this video about the Hot Pursuit DNA that crept its way back into the series vicariously through Most Wanted, and it's very influential throughout arguably the most important part of any racing game, the cars. Underground was a brilliant break of series traditions, with the entire car list considering of vehicles present in the tuner scene, focusing on far more affordable vehicles to contrast the very exotic nature beforehand. But once you've done that for 2 games in a row, things have to be mixed up. It's underappreciated today just how big the makeup of Most Wanted's car list was, not just for Need for Speed, but for racing games in their entirety. A perfect blend of shitboxes and entry-level enthusiast machines to start off your career in, slowly working your way up in speed incrementally until you get into sports cars, supercars, and finally, to the Carrera GT. Most Wanted broke a mold that the series always had limiting it. The origins were so focused on sports cars and exotics, Underground strictly on that attainable and tuner crowd. But Most Wanted, diversity was the name of the game here. And it wasn't just through the serving of what the car roster held, but through how you could utilize each and every one of them. You can use any car you want. Yes, any car. All the way to the end game, without all that much difficulty. And that's because the upgrades in Most Wanted scaled throughout the whole game. This may not seem all that revolutionary in the modern day, but back then, what racing game, let alone one of this scale, gave you such a brilliant sandbox of options to play with? On that topic of upgrading and in addendum, personalization, this was something that was changed in some pretty interesting ways compared to its Underground brothers, especially with Underground 2, which I consider to be the peak of Need for Speed's visual creativity. Hydraulics, nitrous purges, trunk speakers, split hoods, wide body kits, and the most in-depth usage of paint and vinyl editors until arguably this very day. Most Wanted was a definite step backwards, with most of the aforementioned customizable revolutions set by Underground completely missing here. But of course, this was a very different game to Underground. While those games were about celebrating tuner and import culture, Most Wanted was about being the rebellious street racer, less so about personalization, more of a focus on technicality and outrunning the police and other racers. With that being said, it's not like personalization was bare bones here. The groundwork was done with the last two games, and everything that you'd expect to be able to do to set apart your ride is still here in spades, though I can't help but wish the game did more to enhance the offensive options for dealing with the police. This is something that in the modern day, with hindsight, is an easy missed opportunity. Simple things such as EMPs or your own deployable spike strips would add a pretty little cherry on top of already intense cop chases. But I'll get back to that topic in depth a little later on. You know the best thing about cars in Most Wanted though? How they make you feel. Now starting with the most obvious, the physics. Blackbox's Need for Speed games often get the title of the best handling in Need for Speed, and while I think to a specific point, physics models are pretty subjective, I firmly stand by the take that Most Wanted does indeed have the quote, best physics in the series. Let me explain. Are they the most dramatic? No. Are they perfect? Hell no. But in terms of ease of play, while also having a great skill ceiling for those who want to really push these cars to their limits, while also having barely aged in the slightest considering the once again 20-year-old physics model we're dealing with. Yeah, these physics are sick. There's something I always look for with arcade racers' physics, and it all revolves around gamifying realism. Most Wanted isn't realistic, let's all be honest with ourselves. But that's exactly why it's so fun. You take real characteristics of cars such as their drive wheels, the push and pull of understeer and oversteer, but add in a significant amount of tolerance as to where the limits of these systems are, meaning that you can push these cars far beyond what's possible in the real world. Because it's just fun and badass to do so. We have to remember that while yes, racing games do revolve around automobiles and the real world to a degree, they're still video games. And what makes a video game addicting to play? That fun factor and drama, separating them from reality. Speaking of drama, let's talk the rest of the experience regarding these cars. The drama and pantomime of ripping cars around Rockport is pure brilliance. Sense of speed, second to very few others, with the effects work doing precisely what it should, narrowing in on the focus. Look at how as you speed up, your peripheral vision blurs, creating a tunneling effect. The lights and air trails off the back of your car emphasizing that forward thrust of high speed. The camera pulling back to give you the illusion of covering more distance. This is textbook sense of speed, and something that this series is pretty consistently known for doing well, and guess where that all got its groundwork? Oh, and have I even mentioned the sound design yet? Sheer adrenaline that gets your heart pumping, and the touch of having reverse gear be straight cut just as it is in real life adds so much to that extra tension of getting locked in by the police with the slimmest of slim chances of escape. Everything in the realm of cars helped feed the basis which made Most Wanted as cohesive a package the endgame was. But they'd be nothing if the gameplay didn't provide the perfect stage for them to shine. Racing game campaigns are for the most part pretty unmemorable. That isn't to say that there aren't any highlights, or that they can't be strong. But for every 10 racing games, you'll get maybe one absolutely standout career. Most Wanted's blacklist, it's without question the latter. I mean, let's be honest here. It's very arguably the single most recognizable set of cars and rivals that this genre has ever seen, tied up in a pretty little bow by how the gameplay, which gives such a driven flow and motivation through its gameplay loop. Now, I have always, since the very time I played through Most Wanted, labeled it as an easy, at the very least, top 3 arcade racer careers of all time. But I would be lying straight to my teeth if I said it was some sort of infallible magnum opus. So with that being said, I'm going to start off right from the beginning to dissect what the Blacklist excels at, why it's so highly revered, and what I certainly would have done differently. Now to talk about intros, I don't see any other racing game which is as iconic and textbook top-of-the-class game setup as Most Wanted perfected 2 decades ago. Let's be honest, you know this story brief already, so I'll keep this nice and short. You enter the story as a newcomer to Rockport, destined to make a name for yourself in the street racing scene, before biting off more than you can chew, getting into bad blood with the current head-on honcho racer, who pulls the drain plug on your oil pan, causing your motor to blow as you get the chance to race him. Henceforth, he gets the keys to your car, and you're left with little cash to your name, a blooming criminal record, and only your homegirl Mia to help your way to the top of the blacklist to get your car back from Razor. It's simple, absolutely, but set some pillars of the game's themes and motivation in stone right from the very get-go. Right away, you know that reputation is everything. Through Police and Sergeant Cross, through the Blacklist 15, through the drilled-in mentality of having everything ripped away from you, including the source of Razor's pride, their car, and having to use skill to win it all back. You get a beautiful little taste of what it's like to be at the top, as if a little teaser of what's to come late game. And that's exactly what a good racing game should do. Motivate you organically, through gameplay, through narrative, not through a checklist. I will say though, that as good as an introduction to Most Wanted is, and the gameplay which precedes complements that, something that on revisiting the game became very obvious is the serious lack of story in the mid-game. The only real times that you get cutscene or story is at the very beginning and the very end of the game. You wanna know how bad this is? Did you know that the only time you see Cross in the entire game are in the opening and closing 10 minutes? Yeah, that's no joke. Playing through the Blacklist is, yes, fantastic, but it gets a bit oversaturated with very little breakup in between each member, and the only thing close to it are these vaguely threatening voice messages you get every once in a while. That's it. Now, of course, what I'm about to say is, yes, entirely hypothetical to about a 20-year-old video game. But if, for the sake of argument, the game went down to a list of, say, 10 Blacklist rivals, with an approach more like the original Most Wanted's draft characters, with more depth, perhaps cutscenes which fleshed out each one a little more to take your mind out of just repeating the same loop 15 times with very short breaks in between. Sure, it would have been a lot to ask for, and a stark change from what racing games were at this point in time, but considering how Carbon, and especially Undercover, tried to varying degrees of success to add more cinematic flair to the storytelling of these games, I'm not just talking nonsense here. Now, is this really an issue, you may add, especially because of how outrageously strong the initial gameplay loop of Most Wanted is? Debatable, but let's focus on that for a moment. Once you get settled in after Razor steals your ride, everything is pretty straightforward. You get an eeny bit of cash to buy your first car, something slow, but it'll get the job done, and then start working your reputation up by ranking up 3 separate categories. First is racing. You'll have a certain amount of race wins, say 3 or 4, which you'll have to get to check off that category. Next would be milestones. These can be anything from taking out a specific amount of police officers in a chase, being in a pursuit longer than a specified amount of time, or breaking speed records on speed cameras. Knock off enough of these and that's one more category dealt with. The final one is bounty. Police, reputation, and your wanted bounty are critical to the game, as I've said many a time so far, and the ultimate checkpoint as to see if you've been playing the game correctly is by having these bounty checks in between Blacklist rival races. And once you hit that, you'll have all 3 of these categories done required to challenge a Blacklist racer. This loop that Most Wanted gives you is so tightly condensed for quick yet meaningful satisfaction. It's so easy to track your progress and watch your progression in real time no matter how far in you are. It's just as I was saying earlier on in the video, it's all about the time to satisfaction ratio that this shares with something like Hot Pursuit. Minimal time, maximum reward. A timeless formula, yet one that seems to have been glossed over as racing games have expanded over time. Those of you who know me also know that I'm a big fan of event variety as well. It isn't just that categorical diversity that helps feed the broad gameplay loop here, but through what Need for Speeds of the era have always excelled at, not being one note for modes. Race events take place in either circuit or sprint. Sometimes you'll get cops, sometimes not. Knockout events don't show up all too often, but when they do, there's genuine tension. Mix that in with everything that you're doing outside of main events to rack up bounty, or even just getting in cop chases for the hell of it, and you're in for a brilliant time. Except for one event, which I absolutely loathe in Most Wanted. Drag racing. Drag racing in the Underground games was a fun experiment, but it was certainly janky and very primitive. Most Wanted. You'd expect to evolve this style by refining over time, removing a lot of the rough edges. And yet, no. You get some of the most unpredictable, counterintuitive drag racing ever put into this genre. Drag racing in Most Wanted is quite literally like playing a Souls game. Let me cook here. You have to do them multiple times in order to memorize the strict pathing that every AI will go down. Because they drive on such a strict route that is set in stone, which makes 0 sense for moment-to-moment drag racing. Look, I play Souls games, so I'm more than happy to learn patterns in order to win, rather than just lucking out. But that's because memorization and learning is the entire point of those games. That form of play just does not work or fit Most Wanted in the slightest. The whole game is about racing on the fly, street racing. You see why it just doesn't work? These would be eons better if it had remained unchanged from Underground, as the vision here not only just doesn't make sense considering the theming of the game, but hell, it just doesn't even work. The amount of times I've been on these drags just by having my rival tap a pole and get stun-locked, meaning I just cruise at 30 down my way to the finish line, was astonishing. A truly abhorrent game mode that's aged like milk compared to the rest of this game. The last thing to talk about in the realm of events is drift, and the fact that it simply doesn't exist in Most Wanted. I can't exactly give you a definitive reason as to why this is, but my guess is simply time constraints. There was that beta drift track which was concepted early game, but it just never made it through. Is it sorely missed? No, not really. There would have to be separate tracks made for it, as the base map far from suits a drift environment. And well, this game is so strongly themed around street racing, and the ability to hone in on that aspect really makes it shine even more. I think that it was the right call in the end, as honestly, I never once said to myself, man, I really wish there was drifting in this game. Heading back on track to the real driving force behind that gameplay loop I'm so fond of. Most Wanted is all about those blacklist races, baby. The majority of them are oh so memorable. You get a little brief at the start of each blacklist checklist, with a little cinematic where somehow they all keep looking like Trent Reznor in this one image. And then when it's time to race, each rival gets a uniquely tailored in-game cinematic to help feed their vibes. Some of them are kinda forgettable, leading into that whole meme of, we got good writing? Nah, but we got high moments and aura. But it just works here, man. Especially intros like JV, the slow roll up to face off each other as the church clock chimes. Earl getting his Evo just inches from your car. Big Lou rolling up with two fellow scallywag Eclipses. These races do feel like mini highlights and rewards for putting in your time gradually, because there's just more thought poured into the route choice and difficulty. And of course, your shot at winning the rival's car, or those goddamn markers. Why, man? This formula is the very thing that carried you all the way to the end of Most Wanted. And while yes, it is absolutely addicting, and if you're asking me, the most complete and well-executed campaign to play through in the series' history. Going back with a critical mind, the mid to late game feeling of repetition really kept coming on though. I still had fun, and lots of it, but it really does feel like there's this void which should have been filled with more story or characters. Hell, even Underground 1 had albeit very short and simple interjections mid-campaign to meet characters and show a little more progress. But alas, we approach what very well may be the greatest ending to a racing game ever. The final climax with Razor is absolute perfection. It starts off pretty much like any other Blacklist showdown. Take your best car, as the M3 that he stole from you is not here to play around. There is such a legitimate stake and challenge in the final events. Compounded with that hope of getting your very car stolen from you at the start of the game back, it elevates what are in actuality pretty simple events to that of final race status. That is before the real piece de resistance. You finally did it. You've knocked the smug smile off a Razor's face, but the homie Mia has other plans. She's been an undercover cop this whole time, and used the climactic showdown with Razor as the perfect trap for a bust of Rockport's street racing scene. You've been good to her though, and so she tosses you the keys to the M3. And with a hope and a prayer, we get to the greatest final mission in a racing game, escaping Rockport. This is catharsis, and such a perfect conclusion and showpiece of Most Wanted's themes and story. You've got to survive the whole of the police force for about 5 or 6 minutes as your escape route is readied for you, and it is so good. Not much can match the feeling of watching your bounty just climb into the millions as you work your way to the end, fighting tooth and nail, the M3 giving you such confidence. It's a real ego booster, this thing. As your route clears, we launch into the conclusion, as you are now the Most Wanted. I adore that the game gives you a really sweet stat read at the end, almost like a Metal Gear Solid game. It's a great way to close off on that theme of reputation and climbing back to the top that you've been working so hard for. I genuinely love this campaign. The story and characters are ever so cheesy. Sure, there are some hiccups and legitimate low points here and there, but the highs are so astronomically high that it's hard not to make the argument that Most Wanted is the most complete and creatively themed campaign the series has arguably ever had. Now, I couldn't do a video on Most Wanted without at least dedicating some time to the most important part of its identity, the police. I'm not going to sit here though and pretend that I know everything about them. To be totally honest, there are videos which go far more in depth on this subject, so don't expect the most thorough analysis here. But I can talk about why I personally love them. First off is the intensity. When they're firing on all cylinders, the AI is properly out to get you. And in the highest of heat levels, you have to be genuinely trying in order to escape, and even just survive. There are 11 police units that'll come after you if you meet certain conditions, one of them being Sergeant Cross's Corvette, which is a touch that I've always loved. The Rockport police force was far from an afterthought, with over 12,000 lines of police chatter, so much dialogue that if you put each little line next to each other, it would be well over an hour long. That's not all. 35 separate condition codes were drafted in order to describe officers' current status, alongside a plethora of other codes that would be used by the police to describe the pursuit at hand. In the moment-to-moment gameplay, that's where Rockport PD, for the most part, truly shines. But there's also some problems that I can't exactly just ignore. First off, apart from pursuit breakers, police gameplay has absolutely no offensive options. No countermeasures, no real way to attack apart from just ramming, which, granted, is very effective, but risky. It's entirely intentional to give you a genuine sense of fear and tension every time that you get into a chase, but it does feel slightly artificial. Another thing that I really noticed is that spike strips are just so inconsistent. If you hit a spike strip in Most Wanted, which, first off, the hitboxes are never really all that great, that's it. The pursuit is over since there's no reinflatable tires, which adds to the fact that you really have to watch the road. And yet sometimes, police will drop spike strips on totally blind corners yet even with speed breakers you can't avoid. Circling back to the good though, man, they work so well with this map. The fact that police went missing for a few years was just the fire that Blackbox needed to revamp them with a newfound energy. And man, it worked. Pursuit breakers in the fully intractable world of Rockport truly was, and still remains to this day, my favorite combination for police chases in the series. There's so many shortcuts, hidden paths through college campuses or trailer parks that you can use to outsmart the AI. Rockport and Rockport PD are beautiful partners in crime, working in synchronicity to provide the greatest police action in the series. Now, as you can probably tell by now, I really love Most Wanted. And it's easy to say that it deserves its status as one of the greatest racing games of all time. But I can't exactly say that for every game with the name Most Wanted. Meet Most Wanted 510, a version of Most Wanted developed for the PSP, which released in the same time as the main game. Now, as a standalone PSP game, completely separated from the original project, if it was alone in a vacuum, Most Wanted 510 wouldn't be an absolutely terrible PSP game. Sure, it isn't quite as good as MotorStorm Arctic Edge or the PSP Burnouts, but in the early 2000s, if you were a kid without lofty expectations, this game was probably totally fine. But, well, I don't have to tell you twice that we don't live in that age anymore. Most Wanted 510 is only a really good time if you're playing to laugh at it. Sure, it has the introductory cutscene to Most Wanted, but other than that, nothing's really shared here. The gameplay? Not even the same game. No open world, instead a linear stage select style events that vaguely resemble the blacklist found in the original game. There's even new elements such as when you complete a race, you sometimes get the option to outrun the police to get a little extra spoils. Every mechanic found in the real Most Wanted was either watered down so far you'd barely even call it functional, or scrapped entirely. The police being the largest example of this. Totally incompetent in every sense of the word. You could still customize your car, I guess, which is something. But again, compare this game to the best that the PSP racing games had to offer, and yeah, this was just not it. Oh, but hey, this isn't even the worst version of Most Wanted. Welcome to Most Wanted DS. I kid you not, this game is so unbelievably awful that I could not stop laughing for about 10 minutes when I booted this up and started playing it in a call with a friend of mine. Is there enjoyment to be found here? I think. But it's not because of the game, that's for sure. Now, there are some kinda neat DS exclusive features, such as the ability to draw whatever your heart desires most and then slap that onto your profile, or as a decal. And hey, the fact that a Need for Speed game even made it onto the DS is a great concept. But oh my god, this game sucks. This physically hurt to play, not just because of the, well, I can't exactly call this art direction, or art, but because of the audio. My god. The controls as well. I
didn't think that it was even possible to have a physics model so inept at basic cornering, even with tracks as simple as a scale-electric set. Gameplay is even more rudimentary than that of Most Wanted 510. I think there might be police in the game. I played through the first Blacklist member and never encountered them, so might just be a me thing? What else is there to say? There's a career mode that lets you do the exact same thing over and over again, and Blacklist races aren't one-on-one as you'd expect, but instead normal races with a rival just tossed into the mix. There's a quick race for quick races. I'm really grasping at straws here, guys. I'm being dead serious. This game's got that little to it. So it's safe to say that Most Wanted as a name has been thrown around quite stochastically, and yet we have far from reached the most controversial usage of those two words.
Why is it that when you mention Most Wanted in the realm of racing games, everyone immediately thinks of the 2005 original and not the 2012 reboot that, by all accounts, should have been amazing? It had Criterion Games behind the wheel, the same folks who made Burnout Paradise and Hot Pursuit 2010. It had the name, the branding, and the backing, but the magic? The soul? Somewhere along the development highway, utterly lost in translation. Now look, I want to start with what did work, because listen, 2012's Most Wanted is not an entirely bad product. The driving, when it works and isn't like flying a fighter jet through a cityscape, is slick. It's responsive, high-octane, and polished in that Criterion game sort of way that cars handle with that tight, yet flowy feeling that makes you feel like you're always on the edge of losing control, but you never actually do. You can fly through Fairhaven, threading traffic, smashing billboards, escaping cops at 180 miles an hour, and it's exhilarating. Well, when you aren't locked into crash cams. There's a very deliberate sense of speed, a constant push to go faster, take more risks, and make every escape more cinematic than the last. And that identity is tapped on through everything such as the UI and on-the-fly menus, giving a new identity that the series still learned from to this day. But here's where the cracks start to show. What made 2005's Most Wanted iconic was its structure, its world, its escalation, its career mode. You start as a nobody, your car gets jacked by Razor, and you climb your way to the top of the blacklist, one rival at a time, building up your rep and your rides. Every win felt like a step up. Remember that feeling of consistent motivation and reward that I mentioned? The world of Rockport also felt like a character in itself, with gritty city streets, industrial zones, freeways, and that gloomy, overcast filter that just oozed 2000s. 2012's Fairhaven, it's pretty at times, sure. It's open, it's got that Burnout Paradise DNA, where every road is an invitation to go full throttle. But it doesn't feel like a world with purpose, or at least one that had serious potential that was cut so far from the finish line. There's a far simpler sense of progression. The blacklist exists in name only. 10 cars, not drivers to beat, and they're just there. Show up, win the race, done. The focus is so much less on the human side of racing and almost parasocial, focusing entirely on the machines themselves. There's no characters at all to be seen, not even a human face. Though this did lead to some cool ideas such as the Blacklist intro cutscenes, which I will stand by to this day. They were a brilliant way to personify the cars, but that's them on the only bit of character that the whole game has. Now let's talk menus, or the lack thereof. 2012 uses this slick, minimalistic thing called Easy Drive, where you access everything from a drop-down UI without ever pausing. It's fast, it's fluid, and it does keep you in the action. But it also makes everything feel a lot more shallow. Car upgrades. You don't earn them in the garage, you unlock them by completing races with a specific car. Want to change your ride? Just drive up to it in the open world. It's convenient, but there's no sense of ownership. No garage, no collection that you've curated and customized. Convenience in exchange for character. It's like Criterion didn't want you to get attached. Just pick a car, race, toss it, repeat. I don't think this is as black and white good or bad as so many people do think it to be, as the idea does fit the world that Most Wanted 2012 was trying to build. It's just that that world doesn't work for everyone. And that might work in Burnout or another Need for Speed title, but for Most Wanted, that identity matters. The whole appeal of the original was building your fleet, tuning your car, outfitting it with the best parts so you could take on tougher opponents. And in this game, the cars are just tools. Fast, sure, but disposable. I respect the fact that Most Wanted 2012 tried something new with this nameplate. I genuinely do. I don't think everything has to be a one-trick pony. But the execution leaves those with good ideas so few and far between that I can't help but sympathize with the disgruntled fanbase who just doesn't click with it. But maybe the most painful part is knowing that it didn't have to be this way. Early beta builds of 2012's Most Wanted shows a game that was far more in line with the original. It had a structured career mode, police shouted that felt like a direct homage to Rockport's radio calls, an even more grounded tone. The blacklist had more context, more flavor. But as the deadline loomed, Criterion was forced to pivot because of EA's insufferable thirst for greed and avarice. They cut content, streamlined features, leaned hard into the open world, always-on racing philosophy that they perfected with Paradise. Not because they didn't want to make a more faithful sequel, but because time and scope boxed them into stunting their vision and sterilizing the concept. EA wanted something marketable, something easy to pick up and play, and they delivered that, but in doing so, they lost what made the name Most Wanted matter to so many. So yeah, there's a fair bit to like in 2012's Most Wanted, but there's even more to mourn, because for all of its polish and production value, it just undeniably falls flat of what it should and could have been. In the end, it's not that it's an entirely bad game or a bad Need for Speed, spare for a few legitimate criticisms. It's that it's a bad Most Wanted. And that distinction, for fans of the franchise, means everything. It's a missed opportunity. A game with the right name, the right talent, but the wrong priorities. And it stands as a perfect example of how important identity and structure are in making a racing game not just playable, but unforgettable. In conclusion, I want to revisit the very statement that I've been coming back to throughout the video. Just how much weight do the two words Most Wanted hold 2 decades later? Perhaps unsurprisingly, a lot. Like, a lot. You'd be hard-pressed to find a racing game as iconic and influential as Most Wanted. I bring up the question of how it's aged, and that's a question that I have an answer for. Most Wanted has both aged far better than any game in the series' history. What due to the legacy that spawned from not just other series trying to reciprocate that glory, but Need for Speed itself trying to varying degrees of success to repeat those glory days surrounding Most Wanted. But it's also a straight-up time capsule. It's not perfect, it has flaws, but that character, an unapologetically of-the-era presentation that permeates the game, both dates it and adds to the product in a way that I don't see aging any more than it already has. As much fun as it is to make fun of M3 GTR femboys, and sure, the game has developed an almost cult-like fanbase who almost non-stop begs for a remake this or remaster that, or comparing everything and anything to Most Wanted. Just like anything that becomes the hallmark of a time period, Most Wanted is going to remain a video game and cultural icon, just as it has done steadfastly for the past 20 years. There's a gaming phenomenon which has become famous over time when it comes to sequels, and it all has to do with impact. Think about God of War to Ragnarok, Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom, Most Wanted to Carbon. It's the age-old principle of revolution versus evolution. There's an undeniable impact that Most Wanted or any of the other revolutionizers will, no matter what, have the upper hand on. And this leaves the second game, the Evolver, with an immense amount of baggage. This baggage is 9 times out of 10 going to dampen the release of that Evolver. It's a shame, as some of these second installments actually improve upon that revolutionizer and are technically better games, but that emotional impact is gone. I preface all of this as I firmly believe this to be the #1 reason why so many people, including myself, tend to undermine Need for Speed Carbon. If Most Wanted never came before it, and instead this was the sequel to Underground, Carbon would have had near enough that exact same impact. It's actually quite funny. Because of the fact that I just replayed Most Wanted about a month ago, the mindset which I come into playing Carbon with is not far off of how most would have felt back in 2006. It's because of this that I make it clear, just as a nature of mindset, I'm going to be drawing a lot of comparisons between the two games as I go through and review Carbon. Something that I think is quite essential, as it is a direct sequel. As a sequel then, and from an initial impressions point of view, what strikes me about Carbon? First and most importantly, is that while most of the skeleton that frames Carbon is near identical to its sibling, the difference in presentation and themes the two games convey is night and day. Quite literally. Most Wanted visually is bright, dour, and quite warm and yellow in its color tonality. Carbon takes the exact opposite approach. It's dark, high in contrast and very cool with a far more blue feel. Most Wanted by design has a far larger presence and emphasis on police, while Carbon is about nightlife, street racing, and tuning. Not to say that both games don't share many of these same elements, but the approach taken to which end of the spectrum each one showcases is vastly different. It's not, visual themes either, with Carbon taking a narrative approach which focuses on building a crew and working as a team, diametrically opposing that solo and personal narrative that came beforehand. Carbon does so much with the format that was set that it makes you fall in love with the exact same things that I like about Most Wanted, yet in entirely new ways that I hadn't imagined before. And that is exactly what a perfect sequel should do. If Carbon was just simply Most Wanted 2, not only would it have none of the impact of the original, it wouldn't have done anything new with it either, simply reiterating what we've already experienced in maybe a slightly different form. To really appreciate just how brilliant Carbon is, diving into the pieces which make it whole is really necessary. And for me, the best place to start would be with its cars. From the offset, Carbon's approach to cars is very different. There's an even larger emphasis to them, while still carrying over what made people love Most Wanted. The classic formula of start in slow car and work your way up to fast car remains very well intact. Yet what I've always loved about the Need for Speeds of this vintage is that even your starter car gets the same love as a Murcielago. Blackbox certainly loved their cars, and they knew that you would too, so giving the Brera a ludicrous exhaust note alongside not skimping on any of the customization makes you fall in love with your wheels no matter where you are in the game. Now, speaking of this car list itself, well, yeah, sure, it's not massive by any means. Every single choice here is spot on. It's also actually quite a different list to that of its brother. Not just larger, but far more diverse, giving you a plethora of exotic rides, such as the Koenigsegg CCX and Pagani Zonda. I had no idea these were even in the game beforehand, so all of this shocked me. Kitting it out and making it yours was, at the time, debatably the best in the series. The same basic principle for body kits, wheels, and vinyls, and all of that jazz was identical to Most Wanted, but then they throw autosculpt in the mix. It's a shame that EA has ditched autosculpt in recent entries, as totally sculpting your own stylized body kits adds that next level of depth to personalization, as it's no longer just set brands' body kits. No, it's yours, and that's just damn cool. The upgrade system takes the bread and butter tiered system that we're all familiar with and gives you that extra layer of depth with the ability to tune the characteristics of each part. If you wanted a turbocharger to have more mid-range punch, you could absolutely do that. These little tweaks are what made these upgrades so much more than just a one-size-fits-all, letting you complement each car's strengths and counteract their weaknesses. This same concept of adding depth is where Carbon truly shines. While most of its main concepts are carried over, there is that extra layer of complexity and nuance which, as I said earlier, makes you fall in love with the same features that you already adored from the last game, in an entirely new way. The last thing for me to touch on with these cars are the physics. The black box style of physics has become somewhat of a legend as time's passed, and while I absolutely do love the way the cars handle, it is in no way free from criticism either. 80% of the time, it's completely natural and second nature to just get into the groove, which is where these physics thrive. But on the off occasion, you get hit with the realization of, holy damn, this turn in response does not match up. Now, I actually don't think this is an entirely bad thing. If a physics model is too simple, it just gets a little boring to me. I like my games with a little bit of edge to them, and that alone makes it endlessly satisfying when you get deep into that groove and just feel on rails. Though, I do have a mini rant here. I see countless times, through comments of both my videos and around the community, that this black box style is far superior to that of the brake to drift methodology that Hot Pursuit and a lot of the supercar era games highlighted, because they aren't realistic. Do I really have to remind you guys that this is the same game in which drafting helps you corner, and front-wheel drive cars can just drift on command, and you have a button to slow down time and break the laws of physics. Come on, let's be real. Do I give half a GameCube about realism and Need for Speed? No, it's plummet Need for Speed. I'm one of very few that can realize both of these concepts for driving physics are fantastic in their own regard, and it all comes down to which suits the game that you are developing, and how well that you execute it. You spend too long whining about which is more realistic and the good old days were better, that we start to gaslight ourselves into believing arguments which aren't even true. Anyways, now that I've got r/Need for Speed typing up a storm, I want to highlight again personality, through sense of speed, through audio design, and through camera work. Carbon may not have been the first to capture this identity, but it does so in its own charming way, and that's the biggest compliment that I can give Carbon's cars. Now, I've said plenty already about just how behemoth the shoes for Carbon and Phil were following Most Wanted, and arguably the piece of the game where this was the largest undertaking was through its campaign. Let's be blunt. Most Wanted back in 2005 was properly mind-shattering through its introduction of FMV cinematics, a grungy and edgy storyline, simple yet well-executed premise, and most of all, some of the most cohesive gameplay to tie everything together. Most Wanted was the revolution, and so the torch was passed down to Carbon to evolutionize this formula. So did it? Well, I think the best way to review Carbon's career is to reminisce as we go through from the beginning. And what an intro that this is. Carbon is of course a direct sequel to Most Wanted, something very uncommon these days. We pick up as the same protagonist as in Most Wanted, who I'll call Ricky to keep things simple. Ricky is still on the run after the ending of Most Wanted left him with a nationwide bounty on his head and his wheels, and we open as he cruises into Palmont City. A flashback soon dawns on us. And thankfully, these oh so appallingly charming FMVs return to show us, who are y'all? Whatever, as we cut to the start line of a race, in which the woman from seconds ago showcases a very prominent red bag. The color palette chosen for Carbon does wonders to accentuate important components of the cinematics and plot with this neat red hue, in perfect contrast to the blue palette in which the rest of these films have been drenched in. Mid-race, everyone gets blasted by an EMP, except for us for some reason. Oh no, it's the plot ghosts all over again. That same red bag from earlier gets tossed into our car as we jump ship down an alley and down the highway. The end. Huh? Pay this flashback no mind, I guess, since we can't really make heads or tails out of it at this rate. Time to flash forwards to current day and, okay, I'm not gonna lie, it's a pretty sweet touch having Cross come back in, exclaiming that he's back, and asking you, how you been, at the end of this chase. It's a direct call out to both you, the player, and Ricky, and really shows the emphasis on this game's demographic, which would be the Most Wanted fanbase. The chase itself is fantastic. It's a brilliant gameplay demo of how exactly Carbon shakes up your expectations from Most Wanted. Twisty canyons, dark, moody atmosphere, and neat obstacles such as trucks in your path. This acts as a mirror to Most Wanted's introductory sequence, which was the opening race, eagerly diving into the racing atmosphere, while in Carbon, you're running away. Cross's evil monologue is interrupted by a set of racers who roll up alongside. I sure hope they're nice people.
I don't remember asking for your help, Croc.
Oh, God, I'm so glad that the cheese is running at full capacity. It's wonderful. I want to point out again, the strong emphasis on this gentleman's red coat. Anytime you see red, it's a very clear flag to pay attention, and using colors to tell a character's role in each scene. Mr. Redcoat's name is Darius, and he sure seems to pull rank, immediately exerting his superiority over Cross. I found this to be a great way to show the returning Most Wanted players that the guy you once feared, yeah, he's nothing anymore. There's a new boss in town. Darius recognizes us, and without hesitation pays our full bounty. What a nice guy. A lady named Nikki shows up and reams us out. Bro, what did we do? So now we have two people we seemingly never met before, all over our ass for something. Look, not my fault I got a clean stanky leg. Darius gives us the gist, and it finally clicks that we were the racer all of those years ago, which took off with that revered red bag, and tells us to make it up to him by taking out the racers who run each of Palmont's territories, who of course just so happen to be the losers who got suckered by that EMP blast. Of course, Darius forces Nikki to show us the ropes of racing and how it's done here in Palmont, and with full unamused emoji flair, she begrudgingly agrees. Anyways, Nikki takes us down to meet that dog Neville, the monkey.
I'm the monkey!
We'll get more into Neville in a second. As for now, we have a first car to pick. Carbon's gameplay and themes are very centered around three classes of cars: tuner, exotic, and muscle. There may only be 3 cars to choose from, but the choices are great, and highlighted with touches such as playing music which fits the theme of each discipline. Muscle cars using rock and American music, exotics having a techno-electronica focus. I went with the Brera and went down the exotic path for the start. Your introductory race with Nikki shows you Carbon's most unique addition to the gameplay loop: Wingmen. There's 3 types of wingmen: blockers, drafters, and scouters. Blockers do their best to slow down your opponents by, guess how? Drafters give you a massive advantage in straight line speed and even cornering ability if you're close enough behind their slipstream range. And lastly, scouters will go ahead of you and scout for shortcuts and the fastest route to the finish line. Wingmen are such a great idea, and a great way to spice up the existing tried and true event structure that Most Wanted set. While I personally never use scouts all that much, I found drafters to be exceedingly useful, especially on speed trap events. They also fit quite thematically well with Carbon, as the whole story is about rebuilding a team, and being able to display this through gameplay is a really sweet touch of gameplay storytelling. That and each one is a whole cutscene showing themselves and their character traits off. My favorite being Sal, who is the biggest little pleading tsundere out there. These wingmen are just pretty damn funny. Like Neville, who once we wrap up absolutely starts flaming the pursuing police.
Coffee grinder, baby.
Bro, relax, he's already dead. This acts as our tutorial for how police work in Carbon, and while the race gameplay has some great mix-up compared to its predecessor, the police, well, they don't. Now, of course, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and this may just be a placebo on myself, but I found Carbon's police to not have the same wow factor as its older brother. All of the same great mechanics such as pursuit breakers and cooldown spots are still here, but the AI, at least to me, doesn't have the same aggression, though they do sometimes have a few incidents. Now, is this a bad thing? I don't actually think that it is. Carbon is less about the thrill of cops versus racers, and more thematically structured around the concept of racing and building a crew. The impact of police is dampened simply because this is the same approach that was done beforehand. As I've said before, if instead it was Carbon which introduced these concepts and police skeleton, this would have been the greatest thing since sliced bread. As a hand-me-down then, is it still great? Yeah, you bet it is. It just doesn't have the same impact that it does in Most Wanted. Once we lose the police, it's time to head on down to our maid hideout so Neville can show off his power to spin. The world is now your oyster. And it's time to get out racing and claiming territory. Unlike in Most Wanted, where you had to complete a certain checklist of objectives before challenging the next blacklist member, Carbon instead wants you to recapture a certain amount of territory to gain the attention of a racer who helms that zone. You do so by winning events. Win enough, and you'll capture little segments of each zone. It's quite literally a Carbon copy of GTA San Andreas turf system. Hell, if you give it enough time, you'll even have rival crews come challenging you to reclaim their territory. The events on offer are great, though surprisingly, considering this game's more racer-focused career, there isn't as many. You've got Checkpoint, which pits you through a checkpoint-to-checkpoint route throughout Palmont against the clock. This is the only solo event type in the game, and functions pretty much as a time trial. It's a strange choice considering the focus on having a crew to race alongside, so racing alone almost makes you feel naked. Circuit and Sprint are exactly as they say on the tin. Circuit or point-to-point races a la every racer out there. Though I did really find myself loving the dynamic that both wingmen and shortcuts bring to what is the most bread and butter mode possible. Really helps spice things up. Drift brings me back to the underground days. It dramatically boosts the slideability of your car, allowing you to pull off some great sideways action, rewarding you for getting close to the walls and carrying high speed. I do have one complaint about Drift though, and I swear, near every Need for Speed game is guilty of this. They're just too damn easy. You will never, ever have a hard time being leagues ahead of your competition, which to me kills a lot of the mechanical intrigue of drifting. Now lastly, for the quote, standard modes would be Speed Trap. Speed Trap is badass. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This kind of thing has just been lost to time. You never see it these days, which is a shame, as it's properly fun. You'll go out on a set route with a certain number of speed cameras along the path, and your goal is to tally up the highest combined speed. I actually found some of the late game speed traps properly challenging. That's also probably because I had a thing for bringing underpowered cars and trying to make up that difference with the power in Drafter. Now, the gimmick of Carbon is the addition of canyons, and I'm not gonna lie, this might be one of my personal favorite additions to a sequel I have ever tried. The fact I started watching Initial D not long before playing through this may have had a slight influence, but hot damn, these are just the sickest thing. There's 2 modes for typical events, and then one more which I'll get into later in the video. Canyon events have both drift and race variants. variants. They take the standard format for races and drift events, and just drape it over an entirely new way of driving. You can now fall off cliffs and die? The roads are narrow and twisty. This is just the best. We may have detoured a wee bit from the main plot, but we'll get right out back on track with Wolf. Once you've started taking over territory in a racer's zone, you'll get a little teaser of how they act and what their crew's theme is, as the leader themselves makes their presence known. Take over a whole zone and you'll get these stupidly 2000s in the best way possible character introductions. Look, name me a racing game out these days that can match this. They've just got stupendous charm. And finally, we get, without a doubt, the greatest part of Carbon, Canyon Duels. These are a lot less prevalent than the blacklist rivals of Most Wanted, and I firmly believe that goes wonders to enhancing the effect and excitement when it's finally time for the next. In terms of how these are to play, I'm not even joking when I say this might be some of the most fun I've had in a racing game ever. The premise isn't just some generic point-to-point or circuit. You'll have to vehemently fight downhill, remaining as close to your opponent as possible to rack up a score. Once runs have been completed, you swap roles and try to outdrive that same rival, staying as far away as you can. The intensity of watching your personal score get run down faster and faster as you approach the finish line, to only just by the skin of your teeth claim victory, is blummin' unreal. The fact that Need for Speed has abandoned this style of racing is appalling to me, as these are properly fantastic to play through, though it is horrifying to see, no, get it away, stop! Once you wipe whatever the hell that expression is off Wolf's smug face, he is down and out for the count. The zone you fought so hard to take over is all yours now, and with that, more wingmen offer up their services, alongside their recount of the events which took place in the opening flashback. This time being Colin, who gives us a crucial piece of information. That red bag that we were tossed was switched out for another right before the exchange. At this point, the way Carbon's career has been structured is fully laid out for you. You'll have a few more racers to dethrone, and the pieces of the flashback puzzle to put together, but all of the game's main loop has been revealed. I'll touch on each one briefly so we get the general gist of the story and my perspective. The next, of course, being Angie, who looks nothing like her FMV counterpart. She runs a muscle car focused crew, and this is a great opportunity to build a handling focused car and just whoop them all in the corners. As long as you have a drafter, you got nothing to worry about. There's a slight interjection which shows that, Darius has been using us? Who would have guessed? I mean, come on, really, you don't pay off someone's $150,000 bounty and just sing Kumbaya. No. They're indebted to you. Using us or not, we have no choice but to face Angie and dethrone that charger, which, dude, I mean, we're in the canyons, did it ever really have a chance? With the easiest canyon duel set and done, we get in touch with Samson, who's the gentle giant type, chill dude, and even more so, when it's revealed that it was a police officer who helped us escape. Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit. Things are really spicing up now, aren't they? Taking down the next racer, Kenji, is said and done with really quickly. Once him and his RX-7 are out, our next wing woman meets up with us and gives us the smoking gun. Well, almost literally. The SWAT were hired to use EMP-capable guns to take out our opposition, and just not us. We're not missing much from the flashback incident, and it's sure that all will be revealed when we take down our final opponent, Darius. The road to Darius is plenty of fun. Carbon's progression is typical Need for Speed ace, and you'll get a good taste of some really slick rides here. The intensity of the events really starts to creep up too. This ain't like the beginning where you'll be smoking everyone. Your mettle is going to be tested, and I love it. The final confrontation with Darius is here, and his confidence is very clearly a front. Under that smile, he's crumbling under the pressure. In his anger, he asks Cross to tackle us and pin us down, stealing our car, forfeiting us from the whole game, it seems like. It all seems over when Nikki rolls up, and Cross tosses her the keys to our handcuffs? Oh, little cutscene shows us that Nikki pulled out the Game Sharks and was playing 4D chess over here. She made a deal with Cross beforehand. After all, Cross is now a bounty hunter. His loyalty is bought. With Ricky free and Darius' plan revealed, it's time for the real showdown now. We enter into a boss gauntlet of sorts, having to take down all the racers that we fought in a series of honestly pretty damn great races, all before the one-on-one. I don't know what Darius put in that alright, but my damn Koenigsegg was really pushing to keep pace. This is a real damn final boss race. Everything about this, the culmination of the story coming together, the setting and theme of these final events, the legitimate challenge, the mid-race banter. It's nothing other than the cream of the racing game crop. And this may be a hot take. I, without a semblance and doubt in my mind, prefer this to the showdown with Razor in Most Wanted. It's a very different kind of revenge. One that comes from a whole crew of racers who've been done over countless times. Instead of a personal one-on-one grudge for taking your car, the beef that we have with Darius runs far deeper to me. The conclusion here is very satisfying. We get the keys to his fabled R8, the woman that he manipulated is on our side, and he blasts off into the distance in a Jag. The end, bro, can these Need for Speed games stop ending so damn fast? Oh my god. And that's Carbon. Look, coming into this, I heard that this was ludicrously short, but I'd have a good time, and I don't necessarily see that. Well, sure, Carbon isn't the longest racing game out there, and sure, it may not be as content-dense as its older brother, yet what's here more than scratches the itch for a bangin' Need for Speed game. Give me the choice between 10 hours of absolute bliss and 30 hours of meh, and I'm taking the former every day. This was a different era of racing games, one that I severely miss. Carbon wasn't designed for you to come back week after week for a multi-year period. You played through it, spent a few weeks on it, and then you moved on to the next game in your list. Sure, maybe you did come back to it a few times, but that experience was designed to be there for you right in the moment, and it's brilliant at that. This storyline, while cheesier than Domino's, has some reasonable merit behind it, and a narrative that's quite satisfying to put together as you find out more backstory. For this genre of game, there's some pretty respectable writing chops behind it, and the actors who portray the characters in all of their 2006 glory are wonderful. For everything I've said just now about Carbon's story, the game remains as a brilliant time capsule of a style lost to time, and it's a great one at that. The golden age for Need for Speed was magnificent. By 2007, EA and Blackbox Studios had claimed their well-fought seat upon the racing game greats through varied and titanic titles such as Hot Pursuit 2, the Underground duology, and of course, Most Wanted and its sequel Carbon. The question comes after such irrevocable success, what do you do next? It was becoming clear through both critics and fans alike that the street racing style was approaching its creative limits, and in order to truly capture this genre's attention again, EA would need to do something truly new. The initial teaser for EA's all-new Need for Speed was exactly that. There was no Underground or Most Wanted DNA evident. We were looking at something the likes of which hadn't been seen before. This would be the first Need for Speed developed for the next generation of consoles, with its predecessors still at their core being late 6th generation titles, and this meant nothing but great things under the hood of the all-new game. As the marketing train was pushing full steam ahead, the scope of what we'd come to know as Need for Speed Prostreet was soon unveiled. Gone were the interactive and engaging open worlds of its brothers, and in was a fully locked-in, stage-select style setting similar to that of the series' origins, though of course with vastly different presentation and structure. These tracks were no longer modeled over our fantasized versions of real-life vistas, but instead a much grittier, realistic style modeled after racing events. None of this was set up to the imagination either. To properly capture the feel of a racing festival, the development team went out to watch and take heavy notes of Formula Drift events. All of this to inspire the theme in which Prostreet would be structured upon. What exactly did all of this research and inspiration culminate in?
It's kind of like a festival. So in order to do that, we created these amazing cool inflatables. We've got crowds of people. We've got cool graphics on the ground, DJs in the race hubs, music from Junkie XL. It's like street racers and the fans bringing the party to organized track racing. That's the vibe that we're after.
Well, mission accomplished. How hard the vibes of certain games hit is often just throwing around buzzwords for nostalgia bait. But in the case of Prostreet, there was no small detail spared in order to create and hone in those incredible race day vibes that the team wanted. From going to real drift and drag events, the importance of having in-depth volumetric smoke effects was undeniably important. So the time was spent creating a brand new technology just to make smoke cloud the camera and race arenas in burnt rubber. And for drag races, a special feature was grabs smoke and dispels it throughout the wheel well. This is all new technology that the 7th generation allowed, and it's why racing games from this era felt like such a colossal shift. The wow factor of Prostreet's new engine tech kept on giving. The element of danger and grit needed to come across to the player, and on a visual front, the best way to showcase this was through your car's damage. Blackbox's new implementation of what they called pixel damage and pixel shaders would allow for scratch maps, a new way to dynamically damage your ride's paint finish, but most prominently, crumple maps. Your car has crumple zones which, as the name suggests, crumples the metal of your bumpers and chassis in real time. Not only are these car models brilliant looking when shiny and perfect, but when broken, it's hard not to marvel at the details not spared underneath the hood and skeleton. The development team's journey outside of the studio still wasn't over, as they spent arguably the most valuable time developing an entirely new physics engine for Prostreet. This new engine was modeled directly from data provided by Porsche, as the crew spent some time at the famous Leipzig test track, studying how the cars behaved under pressure and the demands of track driving, and calibrating a physics engine which would both incorporate the lessons learned through the Porsche engineers and the accessible nature the Need for Speed series was known for. The main improvement over the previous games in the series being the prominence of oversteer versus understeer, an element which was toned down for the more arcade style its siblings exemplified. With this new tone in check, Prostreet would be unleashed into the hands of many an eager fan in 2007, and on release, oh boy. The ball seemed to be in EA's court, so what happened? Well, the game sold very well. The critical reception was conflicted, to say the least. The combination of gritty, locked-in simulation style with arcade qualities left many people more confused than impressed, certainly not hitting the ground running like EA would have hoped. However, it isn't 2007 anymore. The racing game landscape is very different to how it was when Prostreet released. So what is Prostreet to someone like me in 2024? Well, let's dive right on in, shall we? Hosting the next generation of Need for Speed's cars is a massive responsibility. After all, the heart and soul that goes into these four-wheeled masterpieces is the driving force behind why Need for Speed is so loved in the first place. So how'd they do? For better or for worse, it's undeniable that Prostreet handles cars very differently to how the series had ever been beforehand. And without a doubt, innovation was at the forefront of the development process. I mentioned just now how much effort that was put into the physics and damage models, but how does that actually translate into gameplay? The physics themselves have been historically laden with controversy. With them being a hybrid of arcade and realistic physics, it tends to be quite polarizing. Most people either love it or hate it. And if you ask me, I'm somehow in the middle. Do I like the concept? Yeah, actually, I do. Realistic arcade may seem like an oxymoron, but when executed well, it's a properly fun way to experience a driving game. I'd say about 80% of the time. I think Prostreet's physics are pretty solid. They're nothing to write home about, but provide a satisfying groove in which you have to practice and learn the quirks in order to feel truly comfortable. This is definitely a welcome change and adds in an element of skill and learning a new playstyle, which I always encourage. But there's that final 20% of my personal time with Prostreet, where it can be just straight up jank. It's one of those things that I can't say is entirely intentional, but gives you that immense satisfaction when you confidently pull off a radical top speed run and master that jank to come out on top. Outside of the 20% jank, you really can feel the approach that Blackbox took toward making you feel how understeer and oversteer could change how you push your car. From the get-go and in my first race, I really wasn't sold towards this physics model. I felt it unresponsive and lacking in solid feel. But as time passed and I spent more time experiencing different cars with engine layouts and drivetrain configurations, it without a doubt is an engine that grows on you. And that's something I appreciate. These are video games at the end of the day, and feeling growth and accomplishment through practice and self-improvement is very crucial to the experience, especially one that targets a more realistic crowd. There is one critique I do have on the physics engine though, and it's likely done to improve accessibility, and that is the input delay. Just a tad bit more sensitivity would properly live up the racing experience if you're asking me, but that's a hard ask with the variation car classes on offer here. Physics were just one half of the team's big focus on Prostreet's vehicles, but what really tie into Prostreet's core DNA is damage. I've mentioned already the efforts that Blackbox went to in order to incorporate real-time dynamic scratch and crumple maps, which on their own are impressive considering the much higher fidelity of a next-generation title. Yet it's how this damage was married alongside this new risk-reward physics engine that gives Prostreet its signature and infamous playstyle. Damage is critical to how do you mentally approach Prostreet. Just like in a real track event, while winning is priority, making sure that your car gets to the end in one piece is invaluable. Your car has 4 statuses: fixed, light damage, heavy damage, and you are going to become very familiar with all of them. The difference between fixed and light damage is so much as brushing another car's bumper or wall. Think of it as the game giving you a first strike. Light to heavy damage starts to very lightly affect the performance of your car, though not heavily enough to where you necessarily feel much slower. What you will feel though is the pressure, as this acts as strike 2. You make one more slip up, you're done. Both damages statuses make sure to mentally instill that element of fear, to keep you cautious of getting too frisky with the steering wheel. This isn't as if it has zero consequence either, as damaging your car even with light damage will constantly throw up pop-ups until you repair it, which either cost repair markers you'll earn throughout your playtime or good old-fashioned cash, which especially at the start of your career is very hard to come by. It's undeniable that both the physics engine and damage model lean very heavily into Prostreet's next generation DNA, and gave reverence to why Prostreet's rides have such a cult following within their strong focus on risk versus reward. But what about the cars themselves? This list is not only, I believe, the largest in the series at the time, but by a country mile the most diverse. The best of Japanese tuner legend alongside Bugatti and Koenigsegg, with a healthy serving of American muscle both new and old alongside, taking great inspiration from Carbon in this element. It's not just the big boys either. I absolutely commend the appreciation of multiple trim levels, both the DC4 and DC2 Integras, Golf GTI alongside R32. Blackbox, once again, understood what the players who brought Prostreet would want, to allow the fantasy of building a demonic track weapon out of a Civic CX or 240SX. And build you sure can. It's undeniable Prostreet has one of the most involved upgrade systems in the series history, allowing you, of course, the series staples such as choosing between multi-tiered parts, but with a much more expanded version of Carbon's tuning, now becoming a whole subsection of your upgrade menu. Tuning gives you that fine-toothed comb, letting you brush out all of the little quirks and troubles of how your car behaves. It's no simulator, but it's just enough for the style of the game that we're playing. Tuning isn't the only Carbon feature which had been expanded on. Autosculpt returns, even better than ever before, now no longer just a stylistic way to personalize your cars, but having a functional element wherein tuning wings a specific way can increase or decrease your downforce. This isn't the largest trump card of Prostreet. This, of course, is handed over to the blueprint system. Each car in the game can be designated to one of 4 different classes: race, drag, drift, and speed, and then the 3 separate presets for each class. I'll dive into the intricacies of each one during the career run-through, but the importance here comes from the different philosophy to that of yesteryear's Need for Speeds. The games before this prioritized honing one car at a time until you traded up, but now you've got the task of managing multiple at once, all for different tasks. I can't say that this is a poor approach, but you do absolutely miss that very personal approach that you would have to a single car in the past, as every car that you make has to be a one-trick pony. It's a trade-off for sure. You lose a lot of that personal connection in favor of absolutely nailing the experience of a single discipline. And for one-trick ponies, they're pretty damn unique. The last thing I have to mention in the realm of your garage here in Prostreet is the quality. Each of the disciplines on offer here has unique parts. The models are very high in graphical fidelity for the era, but more impressive than anything is the audio design. The recording process for the car sound was a multi-month-long process, including recording individual engine notes, ripping the mufflers off cars just to get them loud enough, real turbocharger spools, dramatic tire squeals by fitting the loudest tires they could possible, but most emphatically, crashes. Yes, they dropped cars from cranes and experimented with different ways of hitting metal in the studio. Goddamn lunatics. And of course, they probably spent just as much time polishing and perfecting all of these with special effects. There's even stupendous spatial audio tech, including driving close to walls or through tunnels, making those sounds even more lifelike. The end result of all of this labor? Well, I'll let the game speak for itself. Audio is a realm of its own. Visuals are great and all, but to fully immerse yourself in the game world, you need as many senses as possible working together in harmony to make you feel as if you're attacking the track. And on that front, Prostreet has aged magnificently. Undoubtedly, one of Need for Speed's most characteristic traits has to be their campy but ever so endearing stories. Leading up to Prostreet, the question was sure to be raised in just how Blackbox would write a story to take advantage of this all-new setting and thematic skeleton. The answer, well, if you ask me, it's very two-sided. There are so many things that Prostreet's story and campaign truly excel at, but on the other hand, some genuine flaws which dampen the ability for me to truly call it great. So let's dive on in at the start and allow me to divulge just what I mean. We open up our campaign in the most fitting mood possible. The top street racers from all over the country have been picked and summoned to participate in Battle Machines, an organized group which hosts legal racing competition on both street circuits and dedicated racetracks. What's at the forefront of our attention is the immediate presence and intimidation of the festival. We are, after all, just a rookie, entering the big bad world of an all-new racing territory. Yet, at the same time, it's inviting, with the exuberant party atmosphere, live DJs blasting music, announcers hyping up the crowd and racers alike. Those vibes I mentioned before are pumping through in magnificent fashion. To get us hyped and allow the competition to blossom, the universe's famous Ryo Watanabe, master showman and clear big dog, and wait, how is he hanging out of his car yet still doing donuts? Are his legs as long as a stork? Brother must have heard me call him out as he points us, little old Ryan Cooper, out with a direct call out, calling us a lower standard than back in his day. Well, challenge accepted. We shut him up by going through our first race, and he still talks smack by saying we don't even look half comfortable behind the wheel. This cheesy rivalry sure won't get any more. Oh, you really showed him there, Buster. And as Ryo leaves us in a cloud of smoke, our newfound goal is in check. Take down Ryo Watanabe. The path to Ryo is sure to be nothing but long and arduous, with a fierce number of racers to surmount before reaching the ultimate showdown king. And on a narrative front, here's where some of my nitpicks come into play. This great, albeit cheesy setup between Cooper and Ryo has just played out. Yet not only does Ryo practically sideline himself for the rest of the game, but the rest of your opponents are characterless names. You'll occasionally get hints of Ryo as you hit through super promotion events. But again, there's no mini-bosses or smaller scale rivalries to tide you over, such as in Most Wanted or Carbon. All of these smaller rivalries which do exist in Prostreet are right near the end as you're about to face Ryo, which just seems so peculiar to me. On all fronts, it would have made far more sense if you try to drop these aforementioned mini-bosses at the super promotion checkpoints, so you always have something to look forward to as each approaches. Anywho, now that the foundation for our story has been set, Prostreet lets you loose to experience what it's absolutely most proud of, its gameplay. The career in Prostreet is structured on a very by-the-book linear structure. You'll be visiting race days one by one in an effort to build yourself enough credit to unlock a super promotion event, which will then unlock a new tier of race days in before the next super promotion. Rinse and repeat. Your first race day may be rudimentary, but it does a great job of welcoming you to Prostreet's gameplay and immersing you in the atmosphere. The second that you arrive, the announcer has always got something to say about you or the car that you're driving. Hell, even has voice dialogue for every single car in the game. Just as I said before, man, there was no cent spared on budgeting for the most immersive and personal atmosphere possible. Race days typically have at least 2 event types to choose from. At the start of the game, you'll be sticking to 2 beginner classes, Race and Drag. Race class events are for the most part exactly as you would expect structurally, but I truly appreciate that Prostreet decided to include things such as time trials and these fun new sector shootout events to help prevent the standard race type from getting stale. There's a good balance throughout the game which lets race take a predominant role at the start of the game to really push you to learn the new handling model, and then slowly tapering off toward the latter half of the game, allowing for a larger focus on the more extreme event styles. The second class of racing Prostreet welcomes you into is drag. When I want drag races in a racing game, this is what I'm talking about. Prostreet's drag racing is so great it could have worked as a game on its own, and it's because nothing is shared with race in the slightest. The cars built for drag class come with skinny front tires which can't corner. The body kits are now melded in order to fit fatter tires in the back of the car, and this is all just visual. When you're in the thick of it, having to heat up your tires to the perfect temperature, nailing a perfect start, and getting your shifts absolutely spot on just to get a single-digit time is immensely satisfying. You have to commit to drag racing. If you make the slightest short shift, you will bog down and lose immeasurable time. If you get a poor launch, your run is shot. If you blow your engine over revving, you're out. I'd honestly have to name drag as my favorite discipline. The progression of speed from early to end game, the intensity of the races themselves, is nothing but an absolute blast. The next class to tackle is drift, and if you ask me, there isn't much to say about it. Getting drift events right is tricky, as anyone who knows basic car control can trivialize them in any game, and that's what gets to Prostreet here. Now sure, I admit, the physics in drift are wonky as sin, and will certainly take some time to get used to, but once that initial hurdle is over, There really isn't that much to write home about here. The events are nothing like Race in where there's variation in how you use your drift cars. It's all the very same. Hit the highest score of points in a certain section of track until you win. Now, is that bad? No, far from it. But there's nothing that drives me to get excited for a drift event. And hell, you barely even have to upgrade your cars for this one. I kept the same GTO without upgrades from the start up until the very end game. Definitely a missed opportunity for creativity. The final class of car to go over is speed. Speed class cars are well and truly that very word to a T. All of the cars in this class are built for one thing, and that's to hit and maintain an unimaginable speed for an extended period of time. That and absolutely terrifying you. Without a doubt, the thing that strikes you the most about speed class racing is just how well done this sense of speed is. Prostreet does an excellent job of making slow cars feel slow, and then making the fastest cars in the game feel like cruise missiles. Speed class is when you really feel in the late game. The events are by far the most challenging in the game. The physics are very sensitive, and your room for error is quite literally non-existent. The famous speed trap style of event returns alongside the ability to just simply race like normal. But of course, as should be clear by now, there is absolutely nothing normal about how these races feel. Alright, so we've been over the gist of how Prostreet's campaign functions and what you'll be partaking in. And while there are some fantastic ideas and a ton of brilliant game here, I found myself really struggling to push through the campaign at certain spots. It's not as much a case of components being bad, but instead there not being enough to really take you away from that raw gameplay back to back. This could have been through my aforementioned idea of mini-bosses, through goofy character cutscenes, just as a way to add a little break of character, just anything to keep yourself engaged in the world outside of when you're just racing. I'd say all of this really started to compound around the 60 to 70% mark, when aspects of this game that I really do love just started to overstay their welcome. To liven my spirits though, the final showdown with Rio was a proper bit of good old rivalry. And yeah, it damn better be after the long road it took to get there. This is a proper test of every single niche and class of car that you've been using to get through your journey. And as a swan song then, to close Prostreet's journey out on, it's undeniably awesome. The added difficulty really helps get these competition juices flowing. And it's also hilarious to me to see Rio occasionally just absolutely murder himself in the Nevada speed races. Rio's smug face left with nothing but a sorrowful frown as we rightfully claim both his crown on top of the festival and his beloved Evo. The faceless wonder Ryan Cooper has become the champion of the battle machines, and this story comes to a close. You know, this is a really hard one to rate, as there really is so much that I adore here. This premise is brilliant. The setup is even better, but I just can't help but yearn for more of an actual narrative here. And considering the series' history beforehand, that should have been in steep consideration. Nonetheless, with the heavy focus on gameplay, there still remains that strong wish for just restructuring and organizing this career in a more even fashion, rather than being so back-end heavy. All of this being said, I've been quite critical, and that's all because I can properly adore the foundations which make up Prostreet. And honestly, if there was a desire to redo this festival style that Prostreet first envisioned in a future Need for Speed, I'm all for it.
Missed opportunity is a phrase that you'll hear quite often throughout Need for Speed's legacy. Prostreet, Unbound, Carbon, hell even Payback could easily be labeled as missed opportunities. It's the price to pay for ambition in a series as stochastic as Need for Speed, but nothing remotely comes close to the colossal disaster of 2008's Need for Speed Undercover. Many of the series' most divisive games at least have genuine merit, no matter how divisive the sum of their parts may be. But Undercover stands alone, even 17 years later, as the one entry which broke critics, fans, and damn near set the series as a whole into a turbulent downfall. This video serves as my testament to the story of Undercover, an analysis of this game's tumultuous development, the finished product's shady missteps, and the few bits of light that shine through the stunted ports. This is the worst Need for Speed ever made. Need for Speed Undercover. Undoubtedly the most intriguing place to start with the enigma that is Undercover is with the development of this project. Believe it or not, conceptualizing an art started floating around EA Blackbox even before the release of Need for Speed Most Wanted, as the game initially was even codenamed MW2, or more aptly, Most Wanted 2. There are still remnants of this even in the finished product,
with the PS2 port even having throwbacks to the iconic bridge jump, and the map itself being a retooled and jumbled up rock port. The concept art for what at this time was to be known as Most Wanted 2 was really intriguing. Original orchestrations of Tri-City Bay painted a far more diverse and invoking world than what the game would eventually release as. Now granted, it is important to take into account that concept art is always going to be more dramatic than the finished product. But even with that, I want to look at some of my favorite pieces of the concept art. This right here is one of my favorites. This wonderful, more suburban block, painted in rain and accompanied by a more resplendent mix of greens, to contrast the vibrancy of the sunset and the backdrop city skyline. Moving outwards away from the city was mountainous, with beautiful elevation, scenic drives right alongside lakes and dams, complemented by focal points such as this mid-construction observatory or these giant valley canyons. Some of these concept roads outside of the city even quite strongly remind me of Need for Speed Rivals, with this shot in particular. But what without a doubt took primary focus as the focal point of artistic design was the central city. Undercover would certainly improve the sense of scale in its most urban areas, with a real concrete jungle feeling that would tower over the original Most Wanted cityscapes. It wasn't just skyscrapers, but plentiful freeways, bridges, dilapidated slum districts, and more construction sites than you could ever imagine. And cranes. But I'll get to that more in depth later. Now, of course, this is about as good an example as any that concept art well and truly doesn't always match the final product. The art is brilliant, and honestly, considering how messy development was, many of these concepts seem to bleed into other EA games, such as Burnout Paradise, which shares a lot of that grungy, urbanesque flair that this artwork personified. With the game itself, it would start production in the latter half of Carbon's development, under the working title of Need for Speed: The Chase. The story, themes, and narrative would revolve around a far more mature story than any prior entry. Even though Most Wanted and Carbon both had their respective merits in their live-action storytelling, they had their comedic undertones, which wasn't the vibe that Blackbox wanted to go with for The Chase. Instead, the game would be a more stoic and serious take on the vibe that the Fast and Furious movies were going for. Everything so far sounds honestly pretty brilliant, doesn't it? I mean, genuinely, not only is the concept art really impressive, but the story brief and more mature tones was absolutely an interesting way to evolve from the traditional boy racer archetype that the series had been known for in the 2000s. Except, everything was about to go seriously wrong. As full production ramped up, EA would throw a wrench in the mix, splitting the development team at Blackbox into 3 separate groups. One would start development on 2007's Need for Speed Prostreet. The second would develop the infamous Skate, releasing just a month after Prostreet, while the third and final subset of Blackbox's remaining staff would work on The Chase for its 2008 target release. Splitting your team in half is already concerning. You have half the crew that was originally planned to orchestrate a project's vision, pawning twice the workload onto each individual on the team. So just imagine what it would be like to have the entirety of Blackbox working on at least 3 entirely separate large-scale game projects at the same time. And this is the very crux of the issue here. After this strong crunch period, many employees left Blackbox Studios. And while yes, after the releases of Prostreet and Skate, the team did indeed go full bore on the realization and development of what would then be named Need for Speed Undercover, the deadline was soon approaching, and it was far too late for all who remained to fully capture the vision of Undercover. Yet somehow, it gets worse. Because due to the critical reception of Prostreet, which received lackluster reviews to say the least during its launch, all eyes would be on Undercover to bring the fans back. You have to remember that at this time, Blackbox was still communally very much in the limelight. Their entire run, from Hot Pursuit 2 all the way to Prostreet in 2007, was still not as far away as Forza Horizon 4 is now in 2025. So just put that into perspective. Their fans didn't really have any letdowns apart from with Prostreet, so surely Undercover, the renaissance of open-world street racing and Need for Speed, would revitalize the series once more, if only that were true. Undercover would be the lowest rated mainline Need for Speed by a healthy margin, and compounding on the already low morale over the release of Prostreet, dug the series into an inconsistent loop, struggling to regain traction for years on end. There have been flashes of greatness, yes, and even to this day, I would still argue that Need for Speed has never regained that consistent household label that it once so proudly wore with pride. Going back to the topic of Prostreet for a moment, there's something I want to look at from this modern perspective that helps paint an interesting picture of both of these games in a modern light. You see, both of these games did very poorly communally at launch. That's just a fact of the matter. However, Prostreet, especially in recent years, has gained a second win with a huge and loyal flock of fans, while Undercover has unquestionably remained at the very bottom tier in the vast majority of fans' eyes. So why is this? Well, the answer is honestly quite simple. Prostreet was the right game at the very wrong time. Just as racing games were transitioning towards open worlds, and the street racing niche was at the peak of its game, EA Blackbox pivoted exactly away from where trends were going, and that just didn't sit well with critics and fans alike, who this change in tone perturbed from enjoying Prostreet's best qualities and different spin on the series. So in the modern day, where open world racing games are a dime a dozen, playing Prostreet's radically different take away from the time period where it was seen as a strange departure, its twist on festivals and street racing is a waft of fresh, creative air. Undercover was conceptually exactly what it needed to be at the time. It was just what those critics were looking for to dichotomize Prostreet's different approach. The issue was, the execution of this concept was truly and utterly catastrophic. This wasn't a case of right game, wrong time, such as with Prostreet. There was simply an inexcusable mess, which left everything to be desired right on the drafting table. And with that, I want to move on to analyzing the finished product, and just why this game failed to capture the fans' hearts and the conceptual vision of this project. And there is no better place for me to start than with its presentation. One of the things that I've come to love the most about Need for Speed, not only as I've played these games throughout my life, but as I've gone back to analyze many of them for you lovely folks, is that these games love to differentiate and mix up the style of these entries. Hot Pursuit looks nothing like Need for Speed 2015. Prostreet looks so different to Carbon, even though they released a single year apart and share many assets. And this is because of the creative risks that more often than not pay off. I'd even argue that Need for Speed Unbound, while I wish it did more to commit to its radical shift in art style, I enjoy how zany and out there the effects work is in comparison to most of the racing games in this era. Now with that said, to set the stage, let's use the game that Undercover was supposed to sequel as an example here. Sure, there's a decent amount of people who don't jive well with the yellow piss filter that the game has been structured around, but I don't think anyone can deny that in terms of a stylistic choice, it wasn't half-assed, and that's because the game's art direction as a whole leaned into that grungy, heavily filtered approach. Need for Speed Undercover is hands down one of the worst looking video games I have ever played. And I'm not talking from a fidelity point of view, as to me that's honestly not that large of a deal when it comes to games. Purely based off of art direction, Undercover is utterly horrific to look at. Most prominently when it comes to the game's issues is the superfluous bloom filter, which feels like an assault on the eyeballs. The implementation of this is far too egregious. You know the filtered look that I just mentioned with Most Wanted, and how it worked because the whole game was designed around it? Well, it sure as hell wasn't here, because how do you possibly make an uglier color palette than this? And I use the word color very lightly there, because every tone or shade feels so devoid of life. And sure, I will admit there are times where it isn't that bad. Lower light scenarios such as sunset or sunrise can actually sometimes not look half terrible, but by that point the bloom is faded to a point where you can actually see the rest of the art design's faults. Let's start with the effects work. You know how Carbon and Most Wanted, for example, would use a healthy amount of motion blur when you boost with nitrous, and accentuate the bloom and luminescence of your taillights, creating a smooth trail effect. What this does is isolate the world around you, and it allows you to focus dead in on your driving. And at the same time, it makes activating nitrous feel special, even though it doesn't give you a speed increase which necessarily correlates with how these effects make you feel. In Undercover, the effects which happen when you boost are so lackluster. There's the world's tiniest bit of blur around the edges of your screen, which doesn't do anywhere near enough to lock you into your boost. And guess what? Due to how egregious the bloom post-processing effects are in terms of hijacking your vision, you can't even see it most of the time. Those taillight trails that I mentioned are also completely gone. I mean, sure, the camera does jump back a bit to give you somewhat of a greater sense of speed, but that's the oldest trick in the book, and a natural reality of a larger field of view. It isn't intelligent or creative in any way. All of this goes without mentioning just how lame the map of the Tri-Cities is. I mean, by this point in time, Need for Speed was one of the racing games which pushed open worlds in this genre the most. Look at Bayview, Rockport, Palmont City. They stood apart uniquely from each other, with different tones, colors, verticality, and most importantly to me, having iconic viewpoints or infamous spots on the map. I'll use Underground 2's giant central fountain and the casinos as an example here. Tri-City Bay instead just feels painfully derivative, and not only that, because being derivative on its own isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just doesn't even stand up to the same level of quality as those aforementioned maps. The city doesn't really feel all that large, just a giant pot of land with copy and paste buildings all over. Everywhere outside of the city, for the most part, blends together. It's missing exactly what an open world needs visually to stand out. Character. Although you want to know what visually the Tri-City Bay brings to the table? Cranes. No, I'm properly not joking. Take a look at some of the background here. Why is there so many? Different clip. Cranes. Another one. Hey, more cranes. I dare someone with more time than they know what to do with to count the amount of cranes that you see in this video, because I imagine it's utterly stupendous. Someone on the development team had to have had a bloody crane fetish. These cranes are more often than not tied to construction sites, which in most racing game maps may be, I don't know, maybe one or two construction sites in them. Undercover is littered with them. No matter where you go in the city, you're about to find one right around the corner. The sheer amount is so comical that I almost think of it as an analogy for the game itself. Under construction all the way to the very end, left unfinished. And from a function perspective, it can't even redeem itself this way. No, seriously, the map itself is so bad that Blackbox added in a prompt which will constantly flash in your face during free roam to quick start the next event in line. And I honestly don't blame them. Traversing this world sucks. The city is just aimless curve after aimless curve. I get fictionizing a location to make it more fun to drive in. That's of course a reality of game design, and it results in some pretty amazing maps. But the physics here don't even really match the road network. Basically, the only nice thing that I can say about this game's presentation is, well, honestly, I kinda like the aesthetic of the UI and the general theming of components such as the map to fit the investigative blueprinty style. Oh, and the little intro cinematics that play when you start a race are honestly pretty damn sick. There's a ton of them, and it's a great way to build up atmosphere. And on the topic of atmosphere, the soundtrack of Undercover is something that's brought up quite a lot as one of its positives. Which is true, but maybe not quite as true as you may think, and let me explain. Most Need for Speeds use licensed music for the vast majority of their soundtracks, with a few ambient or pursuit tracks composed by the studio themselves. Yes, some of the licensed music is actually pretty great, my personal favorite additions being that of Girls in Black by Airborne and Genesis by Justice. But honestly, there is plenty of skips throughout the track list as well. And to be honest, it's in general hard to praise a few good songs in a licensed soundtrack because, well, they're just songs that I've listened to before and I already like them. It doesn't really have anything to do with Undercover, it's just, I really like those artists. The original compositions don't help things much. They're fine, but I could not name you a single track that I would actively listen to outside of the game, which is so unlike Carbon, for example, where I still listen to some of the garage themes to this day. The garage theme in Undercover is totally fine, and so is the pursuit music. But again, I not only just don't think any of it necessarily fits the theme of the game, or is all that catchy or memorable. All in all, the art design left virtually everything to be desired back in the concept art. The drama and effects work is not inherently terrible, don't get me wrong, but in comparison to its predecessors, it's just not enough. And the same goes for this world. I really did take an open mind when going back to play this game, as it's been well over a decade since I last did so. And well, time did not do any of this any justice. And it's a shame. But so far, most everything that I've discussed has been in the realm of form, and yet, what about function? A successful campaign was critical to this era of Need for Speed. The series up to this point had developed a thesis of revolving every element of the world, police, and how you handle your cars around the gameplay loop that the main campaign brought forward to you. It's the reason that games like Most Wanted are so fun to play, and have remained that way. The loop was engaging, and through the balance of using the open world to advance your story, compete in events, or even just rack up bounty for the fun of it, the whole package was cohesive because it works diegetically through this campaign. The issue is, when you make a game that comes after such a tightly crafted style of play, you have to either put an entirely new twist on it, or make what made that original game fun even better. Now, when we look towards Undercover, there's something that I have to lay out on the table before I get into the nitty-gritty. Yes, for the most part, the game plays fine, though that was always going to be the case, because under the hood, this game is virtually just a retooled version of the prior Blackbox games. So yes, on a structural level, it's alright to play, but that's not down to Undercover's own merit, but a reality of the engine used in development. Let's go over the gameplay in Undercover, as this is where you'll find some of what Undercover actually does do quite well. But it's also what exacerbates the game's issues to a fairly extreme extent. Let's just get the good out of the way, as I want to talk about Undercover's event variety. The events throughout the Tri-City Bay are honestly pretty chock full of variety. Race events are as expected in a Need for Speed. They work. The AI isn't absolutely horrible. It's pretty serviceable, and that's not an insult at all. You've also got jobs, which will toss you into a car that you don't own, with the task of typically outrunning the police or doing plenty of cost-to-state damage. Sure, these are just reskins of the typical outrun or cost-to-state modes, but due to the game's pretty stunted progression, which I'll get to in a moment, this is basically the only way that I've found to experience a variety of different cars throughout my playtime. The best event type though? Easily and without question, the highway battles. These are the biggest breath of fresh air in all of Undercover. They pit you in a one-on-one showdown against your opponent, blasting it down the highway almost TXR style. The traffic count is also bumped up far higher through the engine, so you aren't just aimlessly blasting down an empty highway. There's proper risk involved if you want to try and go for a gap Ayrton Senna style. Now with this being said, the game modes and events may be fine when you're in them for the most part, but everything surrounding them sours the experience. How about the dreadful economy, which makes it so that in the early to mid game, you'll earn barely any cash at all. So bad that even when you're primarily gifted cars through pink slips, you'll have the cash to upgrade them. But God forbid you'd like to buy a car with your own cash to experience more of the list, as all of the cash that you will have earned has gone towards those upgrades. This gets a lot better in the late game, with event payouts jumping up by a staggering margin. But by that point, you'll be so fed up with the repetitive and grindy gameplay loop that, well, you'll just want to rush to the end and be done with the game. What compounds on top of this is Undercover's erratic difficulty, or should I say, lack thereof. 99% of the game is piss easy. Genuinely, you will not struggle with anything. Be it races, police chases, cost-to-state objectives, you're going to breeze through Undercover, and it just makes the gameplay loop even more soulless. You'll be at the midpoint of the game and racing against McLaren SLRs and Lamborghini Gallardos in a blooming Evo, and smashing them at that. Though for such an easy game, there is one circuit race that I can't for the life of me remember the name of, that is an absolute nightmare due to busted AI. My friend Fastminer07 had the exact same issue, which he mentioned in his own segment in his video on the Need for Speed series, which I'll link to down in the description down below. In a whole other realm of underwhelming in regards to this game, we have the police system. It's worth mentioning that due to the change in theme between Most Wanted and Carbon, the downpaid police, while underwhelming, due to the game being structured more around the fact that, well, the police weren't as big of a piece of Carbon. However, Undercover's police are a huge part of the game's theming and gameplay loop. Here's the thing though, the police have nothing to them. They're butt easy to escape from. There's no depth to the chases, no strategic ways for police to take you down or mix up chases. And when you're mid-pursuit too, the atmosphere is so vapid. Remember all of the over 12,000 lines of police chatter that was recorded for Most Wanted. Not only was that amount near on superfluous, but the quality of that dialogue is next level, because it was a huge new feature, and it had to live up to the hype of being such a large part of the game's theming. Undercover's police dialogue just has no charm, no spunk. Take a listen to these examples.
Officers on the pursuit call. Suspect vehicle was last seen heading south on Ocean Hills Drive. Supervisor requesting you set up a quadrant ASAP. Units remain on Code 6 status till further notice.
We got the road ahead blocked off. But we gotta close some more streets.
The only good thing that I can say about the police is that these takedown cutscenes are absolutely S tier. How do you not laugh at that? It's just so funny. These stupendously over-the-top cutscenes had to have eaten up all the development budget for the police section of this game. It is genuinely hilarious. So all in all, the gameplay doesn't match up to its older brothers, but what I also think helps contextualize just how disappointing what Undercover brought to the table was, is when you look at 2008's other racing games. MotorStorm Pacific Rift, Pure, Race Driver Grid, and for a more direct comparison, Midnight Club LA. This is the level of quality that Undercover was in direct competition with. It doesn't take a genius to see that while some of these games are different conceptually to Undercover, the level of execution and passion poured into them far exceeds the wasteland of empty soul, which is Undercover. The last thing to talk about in the realm of gameplay is the cars themselves and how they're handled. Customization is pretty much a simplified Prostreet, and well, same goes for the performance parts. You know how Carbon added in another level of depth with the ability to have pseudo-tuning for each individual part? Well, all gone now apart from a radically simplified menu, except for the PS2 port because, yeah, that makes sense. And by the way, have I mentioned at all yet that this is mostly because stat upgrades get boosts by an RPG-like percentage increase system? This isn't Persona or Final Fantasy, guys. This is Need for Speed. It properly perplexes me why they decided to dumb things down for this clearly arbitrary system. What's the logic here? You do more races and your brakes get bigger? Just why? And so far, the presentation of Undercover, certainly far from perfect. The gameplay, far from redeemable. So please tell me that this story can help. Oh boy. Where I found the most promise in the project of Undercover was through the narrative that the original draft conjured up. A dark, mysterious, enigmatic take on the traditional street racer tropes. This soon became a serious issue though. Writing a story which revolves around that concept has to be written well. Character motives need to be understandable. The characters themselves need to be well played so it doesn't seem too cheesy, and the plot itself has to engage you, the audience. Need for Speed's prior and former never really did this apart from maybe The Run or Rivals. There's always been an element of comedy and self-awareness to the writing in these typically campy stories. Most Wanted and Need for Speed 2015 have some pretty cheesy and comedic writing, but the thing is, they don't take themselves seriously and just go full bore on leaning into that. The immediate issue that you'll realize with Undercover is not only is the writing glued together by string cheese and performed about as well as a C-grade sitcom, there's no element of self-awareness. It utterly believes that the story being told is great, and so there's this disconnected stoicism in how this writing unfolds. And for me at least, it utterly ruins the narrative. This is precisely why I begrudged going through this story again, because this had to be the single greatest setup in the history of the series, and this concept is incredible, and yet it was completely butchered. With this being said, let's dive on in from the premise and allow me to explain just why this narrative fails. We start our story as the iconic player. Need for Speed had such a strange obsession with this around this time. The plot from the start is simple yet intriguing. We hone in on a meeting between our pseudo-boss Chase Lynn and the police chief of our department. There's been a large ring of car smuggling incidents around the Tri-City Bay street racing scene in a potential international car theft smuggling crew, and so ourselves the player will be going undercover to infiltrate the street racing scene as a fellow street racer. It's a good start, but it doesn't last. You'll soon start to notice all sorts of inconsistencies in world building as you start doing tasks for Chase. And it's one of the things that creates a large disconnect between these cutscenes and the world that you're playing in, such as actors not even wearing the same clothing between camera shots in the same cutscene, or the fact that whenever you start a race, the cars in the starting grid don't even remotely resemble the class or make of the ones in the live-action cutscenes. It's a huge example of diegetic disconnect, where you almost feel as if you're playing a video game on its own that occasionally pauses to play clips from a totally unrelated TV show. The integration of this universe is textbook incompetence. You'll soon get your first lead in the initial crew that you join, that being a pair of brothers, Zach and Hector, who run their own series of car thefts in the city. I sure hope this doesn't turn out to be a completely obvious red herring. One thing that I've always found strange is that during the undercover work that we perform for them, we actively steal cars and perform jobs for the gang, inherently giving them the cars that they need to keep functioning. What a shitty police job. It's not like this happens once or twice. No, it's actively the point of the game to earn their trust. You'll also around this point in time meet Carmen, whose entire point for now is just to thirst over the main character. I mean, not complaining, but hey, she really doesn't have that much more to her character than that. With Zach and Hector, you'll play a little bit, gain their trust, and take them down in some of the most whack takedown missions that you will ever play. Seriously, these just utterly suck, gameplay-wise. But once you're done this, it's learned that, oh no, that wasn't who we needed. Who would have thunk? And so you'll move the investigation further out to the outskirts of the city to try out more gangs in the search, where, oh, the exact cars they were looking for were found. We quite literally, have all of the evidence that we need right in front of us to close this case, including the leader of the gang. But we keep going. Okay? The characters in this bit are so awkward because they're horrifically overacted while being the single most plain milquetoast character archetypes on the planet. G-Mac, he exists. Rose and her overreactive boyfriend feel like Fast and Furious background actors. There's no real reason to be invested here. And you know what's absolutely hilarious about that narrative disconnect that I mentioned earlier is in one of the cutscenes, G-Mac offers you a bunch of pink slips to choose what model of car you play with next. And he recommends the Viper belonging to one of the crew members, which would be great if that model of Viper was even in the game. There is in fact a Viper, but not only is it the generation after the one shown in the cutscene, but it isn't even in the options given to you. Lord, this game is something. You'll continue to grind through jobs for G-Mac now, and occasionally get plot points teased with Carmen getting attacked at random, and a sweaty-ass dude in the back of the car calling chase. Like, come on dude, it's not 1952, you've got reclaim events. No need to be dramatic. It's soon confirmed that G-Mac's gang was the one exporting these cars to South America. Like we didn't already know that from the fact this was quite literally spelt out for us the second we joined the gang, but whatever. There's also this strange side, I don't even know what to call it, where Rose invites us to a race and her boyfriend cuts her brake lines nearly killing you. Alright. While we recover from this accident, Chase's boss was doing his homework, and he made a connection that an Asian crime syndicate, and the name Chow Wu, who was the same guy who called Chase earlier, was involved in these carjackings. The cutscene's fine, but the performances were making me fall asleep until...
Very dangerous.
Where did that come from? So the job from here on out is to steal Chow's car and frame him for the carjackings. Something I don't think was necessary if the chief had done his due diligence and had legitimate evidence. Just arrest both G-Mac's gang and then Chow. But again, whatever. It's revealed to us that what we've been looking for, a specific car, had been stolen from him. So the mission then turns to taking down J-Mac's gang until Carmen calls us. Oh man, she became relevant. And she reveals to us that Zach had had the car under wraps the whole time. And wait, that's not even the same car, you mongs. Look, it's blue. The one in game is gray. Whatever. I sure hope nothing bad happens when we tell Chase? Son of a bitch was working with Chow this whole time. Okay, I sure hope this doesn't get any more crazy. You have got to be kidding me. Chase was using us and the police to get what was hidden inside the M6. And once she's got it, the final mission is to chase her down and end her once and for all. So, why was Chase doing all of this? Well, there was a device inside which held all of the evidence for the case so far. Why Chase decided to go behind everyone's back, while we all quite definitively already had a lead on this, I have no idea. Apart from the game just wanting someone to take the fall for everyone else. This story, what do I even say? It's so messy, sloppy, it hardly even connects with the world that the game sets up. The conclusion is rushed beyond salvation. But considering the game as a whole, I guess that's pretty on brand, isn't it? Somehow though, this gets worse. When you look at the story and the game as a whole when you're playing on the PlayStation 2, I myself don't have the most in-depth experience with this version, but I do have a very good friend who does, so I'll pass this segment on to my good friend, Detective Fat Weedington. Take it away.
Hello there, I am Detective Fat Weedington, and this section was written by not only me but our friend Moon, who was also collaborating in my channel with writing scripts and giving ideas. I'm going to relate the hell out of this mess that looks like if Quentin Tarantino had a crane fetish instead of a feet one. But unlike a Tarantino film, where they repeat words and I'm not even going to say, the story here is the same awful one with the poor writing and the poor imitations of CSI Miami. It's so poor in fact that it makes the show itself look like an episode in Columbo, and if you think the original game was already more of real slop than it is, you didn't experience the horror stories of the PS2 and Wii ports of Undercover. So other than the graphical difference between the two ports and the fact that they share the same lineup as Carbon, the game is essentially a Miami reskin of Most Wanted's Rock port, reconfigured to look like the Tri-City from the other versions, making the buildings and textures being changed to make it look worse than it already were, even to the point where they didn't even change some of them, and there are some areas that are completely closed off or changed for the worse, such as the underground sewage turning into a blocked off car park, despite the fact that it appears on the map, and the jumps into the prison now turn into a mall were butchered to the extreme. It's a simple copy and paste apart from what made the map in Most Wanted work in the first place. It's so much so that you can even find the bridge from the last pursuit of Most Wanted 05, open for full exploration and making losing the cops fairly easy, to an extent. However, the new areas of the game doesn't feel any better because this edition have the worst driving models that any Need for Speed game has ever had, until 7 years later when Need for Speed 2015 arrived and made everything worse. You partially get the same game modes as in the original game, but they're toned down because the PS2 or the Wii, if you like to play with the dildo, is already begging you to stop running this mess. The races themselves are so bad that you can mistake them of Dumbzo playing the Resident Evil 4 remake. The AI has the same intelligence as the comment section that claims everything is woke DEI, and the physics are so faulty that you can go to the speed of light in a stock eclipse. The hot pursuit missions in this version must be the strangest thing in the world. It almost makes the other ones from the other versions look polished in comparison. Getting busted in this game is nearly impossible as escaping from the police, because the heat level in this game is completely broken, and the backup countdown timer doesn't mean nothing because the game will spawn them almost constantly. Even when you're attempting to conclude, they'll ensure that you're stuck in a Yes King video because they won't fuck off. Not to add that they create barriers every 15 seconds, and these events can last you between 15 to 25 minutes. Even after you're done, they'll sometimes act like you're still in a chase even though everything is done. And don't even get me started on the wheelman objectives that you have to complete in this game, because for some reason some sections are absolute pain in the ass to finish. They're not difficult or anything apart from one mission where you have to save carbon from a group of triads. It's largely the takeout missions since the game doesn't know if you're trying to hit the person you're trying to take out because the physics in this game are a complete joke. Not to mention that the AI doesn't act like it's being gang stalked and run away from danger. Hell, it can even be stuck. The other missions are completely broken to nonsensical. And it was evident that the developers had insignificant time due to EA being a dumbass captain of a large ship, as this version of the game came out the same day as the others. EA was essentially rushing things or not giving the devs enough time. The only positive part about this port is the local versus, where you can drive cop versions of the Ford Mustang, the Lamborghini Gallardo, and a Volkswagen Beetle, and try to beat your friends driving other cars. And the aforementioned soundtrack, although there are some songs that were cut in this version, and Maggie Q. No, I'm not elaborating, I just really think she's a really good actress. But other than that, that's pretty much it. You have the same other disciplines that have remained unchanged since Most Wanted. The only reason I believe this game was considered to begin with was the never-ending popularity that the console had in South America, since neither Sony nor Microsoft started selling consoles, officially at least, in those markets until 2010 when the PS3 and the Xbox 360 arrived to South America. So if you happen to be like this woman right here, who lived her entire life on the countryside of Argentina or any other country in South America, and believed that the internet was the most creative invention on earth, you might have experienced this low quality version of an already low quality product. Also, fun fact, this is the only port where the cover car is used in the entire game, where Chase drives it instead of an M6. Yeah, that's fucking strange. Anyways, this game sucks, people who like it are subhuman, and Moses really likes Nicole from ZZZ. Back to you, rat fucker.
Thank you, Eddington, for your insightful commentary. Definitely do not go down to the description and give him a subscribe. I will be very upset if you do this. To finish off with Undercover, I want to hone back in on why this game failed. I've talked a lot of smack against this game, but I have to make sure that it's known that I say this out of anger for how EA has and continues to treat many of its studios. Undercover is a bad game, yes. There's no debating that. But that's not because the team behind it was uninspired or the concept itself was bad. Undercover is a terrible video game because of greed and a publisher who treats its IPs and the souls behind them as disposable. I know many of you love Undercover despite its flaws, and I don't want a critical video like this to take away from any of that. While as a product and execution of vision, Undercover missed the mark quite badly. I know that it resonated with many people's childhoods, or it hit at just the right time for some of you, and I respect that. However, there's only so much subjectivity that can be thrown at a game like this. I, without a semblance of doubt in my mind, name Need for Speed Undercover as the worst Need for Speed that I've played. Payback may have had worse design choices, but it was at the very least mediocre apart from that. The poor ports of games are just terrible ports of decent games. Undercover is a rotten product from its very core, and there's no amount of nostalgia, vibes, or an open mind that can get me past that. If you're looking to try the game in the modern day, I highly recommend modding the experience with a reformed mod to make the game less jarring and diminish as many of the game's faults as you can. But nothing can stop this from being the worst Need for Speed ever made. Need for Speed: The Run answers the one question that absolutely no one was asking. What if Michael Bay directed a racing game? It's not very common for games in this genre to take a slightly more gritty, explosive, and violent approach towards racing, especially in the modern day. But The Run is a dynamite-filled escapade from the traditional and more conservative racing game. Over the years, The Run has earned a very strong cult following. But in all seriousness, I feel that The Run doesn't have that mainstream respect that it deserves and wanted to appreciate this beautifully over-the-top racing. So welcome to The Run. Now before we dive too far into the story of The Run, let's discuss what exactly is this game. The Run was the last Need for Speed developed by Blackbox Studios, and a very welcome change from
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no.
With the goal of turning Need for Speed into a more Hollywood-esque, story-focused series, the plot is relatively simple. You play as Jack Rourke, a street racer with a debt to the mod that needs repaying. It's unclear exactly why this is, but I'm just gonna assume it's for pirating Backyard Wrestling 2 There Goes the Neighborhood on his little brother's PS2. Jack gets an invitation to participate in a highly illegal yet very rewarding street race across the United States in order to pay off his debts. This is no easy race, however, as The Run goes past the convention of what is normal in terms of Need for Speed. There's mobsters with guns, helicopters with turrets raining down on you, on-foot police chases, and much more I'll get into in the story overview. Hot Pursuit and Most Wanted, which came out before and after The Run respectively, both had open world elements to each of them, but The Run is very different to any other Need for Speed in this regard. You have to complete the run in sequence, and then you get access to each individual one of the run's 10 stages. I've mentioned before that I'm not a fan of Need for Speed open worlds, and that's because of games like this. Stage select allows so much more creativity to shine through in each individual location without having to blend in and mix in one giant map, giving The Run the ability for one of the most vast color palettes in racing game history. You'll go from the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco to the nightlights of Vegas, the average day in Canada, to the grungy and gritty streets of Chicago, and there's still so much more that I haven't covered yet. Each individual area of The Run has its own personality and quirks, but when it comes to that, there's no better place to start than with the story itself. Our story starts off with Jack waking up inside of a Porsche 911, just feet away from being dropped into a vehicle crusher. And it immediately throws you into the most anticipated gameplay feature of The Run, QuickTime events. This was, after all, the era in which QTEs were getting exceedingly more common. Thanks, Heavy Rain. Escaping a Porsche in a vehicle crusher is surprisingly the least dramatic QuickTime event section in this game. Oh boy, just you wait. Now, I personally don't absolutely hate these, but they're definitely a bit, let's go with unique. Once your controller is left absolutely knackered, it's time to go do exactly what you would expect to do next. Steal an Audi RS4 and escape gunfire from the mob. Funnily enough, this isn't even the only time Jack will steal an Audi in this game. In serious need of a way out, it's time to meet with our fixer Sam. She hooks us up with all of the best races in town and heads in on a massive race. A $25 million jackpot from San Francisco all the way to New York. I do appreciate how in this cutscene at the restaurant, we do get glimpses of all of our rivals throughout the run. It's a little touch, but much appreciated, and it gives you a little taste of what they're like. Time to go pick up a set of wheels for the run though. And let's briefly go over cars in this game, because I have a big issue with the run's cars. The list itself is fantastic. Tons of variety from hot hatches to the latest and greatest hypercars. And the physics are pretty good. They're not quite as drifty as Hot Pursuit, but certainly not as simcade as the Shift games. My issue lies with how you go about unlocking them. Cars are locked behind either medals in the side mode challenge series, multiplayer objectives, which is pointless since the online is now dead, or behind console exclusivity with the PlayStation 3. And this isn't just a few cars, this is the vast majority of the list. And it's something that really lets me down, is it feels like you maybe have a dozen cars to use in the main story mode unless you purposefully seek out more. San Francisco is full of city streets with cars both on the road road and parked up on the side, as well as the world-famous hills, which are fit for a ton of airborne fun. The first stage doesn't throw too much at you, just getting out of the city as fast as you possibly can in order to qualify for the run. Just out of the city is where your main event type gets thrown at you, basically an alternate version of elimination races. You have to overtake a specified amount of vehicles before you reach a set distance. A pretty simple yet tense concept, as there is no second place here, only first, which is something I really do miss about games like this. You play to win, and shouldn't accept anything less. The freeway outside of San Francisco leads you to Yosemite National Park, which is the polar opposite of the grid-like city we were just in, tossing you along through all sorts of curvy mountainside goodness underneath waterfalls, next to some jaw-dropping cliffs, and some pretty nifty off-road shortcuts if you're feeling brave. Speaking of shortcuts, the run takes what Hot Pursuit did and just amps it up to 11, with some way longer shortcuts, but they also increase the risk factor with some really tight roads and tricky sections. But if you're skilled enough, these are essential to setting record times. Time is also important, as Yosemite introduces you to your next event type, time trials. Time trials in the run leave you with a set of checkpoints and a dedicated time limit. Reach the next checkpoint and your time limit will increase. Time trials alone are fun, but they get even better with what comes next. Your main rival in the run, Marcus Blackwell, catches up to you and commits a slight bit of tomfoolery by nearly sending you off of a cliff. Of course, we don't let this slide, and it's time for rival showdowns. A certain time limit is given to you, and you must overtake and hold position of the rival ahead of you before the time is up. If not, game over. The next target given to us is to hit position 150 before we hit Las Vegas, and it's up to us to conquer the scorching Death Valley in order to do so. Death Valley mixes in some really tight stretches of highway with some visual hindrances such as dust storms in order to make that oncoming traffic lane ever so treacherous. But it's not just dust you gotta keep your eyes peeled for. We got cops, and these guys don't mess around. The police AI is really aggressive. And when it comes to roadblocks, it isn't just your typical horizontal roadblock with a single free spot with gap in between the cars. No, they like to pull over right in front of you as you're both moving, really testing your reaction time and keen eye. Speaking of eyes, my brother in Christ, Jack, they are Need for Speed thoughts. How are you this down bad? Anyways, on the approach to Vegas, the police chase gets even more intense, driving through quiet suburbs, busting down fences and ruining people's livelihoods, and getting caught in a police roadblock. Now, what precedes this is just so over the top, it is hilarious. Just let me showcase to you just how ridiculous this is. Jack gets pinned down by a police officer, fights his way out, trips the goofy-ass police officer over, quick time event sprints and jumps a 10-foot fence, almost gets his face chewed off by an attack dog, bursts into a tourist shop stealing a hat, only to dodge not one, not two, not three, not even four, but 5 cars, as well as a truck and trailer which flips over his head. And would you believe me if I said this isn't even the most crazy action sequence in the game? Oh, and for fun, he just goes and steals a hypercar. Now, obviously, after almost getting captured by the police and run over by a semi-truck, you can imagine that we would have lost a solid amount of time in the run. On the way through Colorado, we have to escape and stay low through the desert hills outside of Vegas. This is where the run starts to not quite have that solid hook that keeps you playing through the game, but that might also just be to balance out the pure insanity that was Vegas. The hills really do live up to their name though, with some really wild jumps that can really unsettle your low and taut supercars that you just stole. And it gets even funnier as you're going to be doing a decent amount of off-roading, which is odd for mostly rear-wheel drive 500 horsepower exotics, but it is Need for Speed, which gets a bit of a realism pass for me, so I can forgive it as fun anyways. The run gets into one of its very best sections next, however, when we get into the Rocky Mountains. I might be slightly biased here as I am a sucker for snow sections in video games, but the Rockies is genuinely well done. You start off on a highway which gets you slightly more used to the slippier style of how your car reacts to the snow, before slowly incorporating sections of ice as you get into the real twisty mountain roads. Oh, and the cops here are absolutely brutal, relentless in their pursuit, and will stop at absolutely nothing to make sure that Jack doesn't continue in the run. It's not just cops you have to deal with, however. Caesar and his crew are somehow driving 700 horsepower El Caminos in the snow, which I gotta say, hats off to them, that takes some serious skill. The race with Caesar is one of my personal favorites in the game. It's very well balance for you to offset the El Camino's sheer straight line speed, with plenty of corners to make up ground. That and the track design here is superb. The slippery and treacherous mountain pass reaches its climax right at the summit, with, in my opinion, not only the best race in this game, but one of the most well done and memorable races in racing game history. Jack nearly gets nay-nayed on by an R8 bursting through the top of Independence Pass, and it's time for a one-on-one showdown to the bottom of the mountain. The 12-kilometer sprint may not actually be that long, but there is so much that happens, and it's a real testament to the Frostbite engine that the run uses. Projectiles get launched towards the peak of the mountain, and as you would expect, this might be a slight inconvenience for our race. As we get caught in the midst of an avalanche through the majority of the race, you do get a slight break through tunnels. That is, of course, until the lights get cut out, and it's all on you to get out safely. The rest of the stage gets even more dangerous, with boulders crashing down on the road, ice patches, and that final conclusion with a completely blind finish while hitting top speed. This is hands down my favorite moment in the game, and something that rarely gets appreciated is how stunningly well done the sound design is. The whole game has a phenomenal action movie cinematic sound design with some tremendous effects, but the avalanche race especially shines with the sound of snow falling on one side, your engine screaming for life on the other, and boulders and projectiles coming from above. Even in tunnels, it is eerie, with the boomy crashing of the avalanche combined with emergency storm sirens. Look, I might be gushing a little bit too much here, but I genuinely adore this race. Jack still has the goal of getting to the top 50 before Chicago, and we head to the Great Plains to settle our nerves a little bit. The plains are nice to look at, but it's all very surface level. A highway battle to start with, before moving into the countryside with a few more events and a rival showdown before we really get into Chicago. This is the only real lull in the story, as it doesn't introduce anything new to you or leave you with any particularly memorable races or great locations. But unfortunately, Chicago is calling our name. As we enter the Forbidden Land, and Sam warns us about the approaching mob threat, good old Marcus Blackwell pulls the Glock on us. Obviously, we aren't just gonna let this stand, and as we enter the dramatic and moody set piece of Chicago, one of my favorites, it's time for the most ridiculous section in the entire game. Marcus leads us into an ambush in where his mobsters crash us out of the race. So, of course, we run from the car, go upstairs to some random building, start jumping across rooftops, dodging helicopter bullet fire, obstacles, before jumping down into an alleyway, fighting off a police officer, stealing their police cruiser, then using said police cruiser to continue in the race while getting shot down in a bullet storm of a helicopter chase, in which innocent civilians get blown up because explosion reasons, before the chopper shoots an oil tanker, causing Jack to swerve off the road into a ditch below. Oh, but we're not over yet. That ditch was actually an active railroad track, so when Jack regains consciousness, a train is barreling down the tracks right behind him. So QTE time to ever so narrowly escape the incoming decapitation. Oh, and Jack just goes and steals a car from an Audi dealership, so yeah, average day in Chicago if you ask me. The Great Lakes is our next stage, after cheating death approximately 643 times in Chicago. And the explosions really don't stop, as the mob is still right on your tail. So where do we head? Cleveland. Yeah, we're fucked. The run continues to go completely off the rails when the industrial district starts to fall apart, launching steel beams down onto the tracks, sending you into the construction yards and underground. You can even see parts of the city on fire, which, again, I'll forgive for creative liberties, and it really does add atmosphere to this dark and heavy section. After casually knocking a helicopter out of the sky with his car, Jack heads into a garage to get equipped with a real car to finish off in these final stages of the run. I love how this sketchy backyard mechanic with a beat up, overrated Toyota in the background somehow has a mint storage space for 3 of the most exclusive supercars at the time, just chilling there. And speaking of which, the Porsche 918 RSR is in this game, probably one of the only games that this car is actually in, which is a surprise considering just how badass it is. The penultimate stage in the state forest is visually top 3 for me. We start off in the farmlands with some jaw-dropping fields and really great shortcuts, and the jumps in between these little covered bridges really give me memories of old school Need for Speed from the PlayStation 1 era, just revamped for more newer consoles. It transitions to more backroads the further you go in, with a one-on-one battle against Jack's Awuga Crush as the difficulty really starts to ramp up. These final few stages is a real sprint to get as close as you possibly can, and it pushes you into a lot more one-on-one battles, and these are my favorite in the game, especially when the cops equipped with much faster cars than before get involved. It's time for the final stage of the run. Manhattan is in sight, and in turn, Marcus Blackwell. But we still have a few more rivals to pick off, and there's one complaint that I have here. These final rivals don't have all that much to them. I was really hoping for more intense and creative races,
but some of them just feel like races we've done before, with scenery that vividly resembles previous stages. This could be seen as reminiscing on the past races, but considering this game is approximately 5 minutes long, it just feels like repetition. I can't say the same about that final showdown between Jack and Marcus, however. This race is properly intense. Starting off jumping through alleyways across traffic from multiple directions, and through some oddly similar set pieces to the next game in the series. And then you start going against oncoming traffic on the Manhattan Bridge, weaving inches away from your inevitable death, right before Marcus shoots us down into the subway tunnels. You not only have to switch lanes to avoid trains coming towards you, but from behind as well. All while that fantastic sound design fills you with dread as you slowly start to hear the crashing of train tracks behind. Getting off the subway, we get to the dockyard, with a final sprint towards the finish line between shipping containers. Marcus genuinely sucks though, as he somehow managed to flip his Aston like 100 times over, what, a leap? It's really strange, he just kind of crashes and dies out of nowhere, but this is it. The $25 million jackpot is all ours, and we meet up with Sam to celebrate. This conclusion is very cookie cutter. Simple small talk before Sam offers us the ability to double down on our reward. Seemingly some kind of sequel bait, but as I'm sure we all know by now, that never happened. The main story mode of the run is excellent, but it isn't the only playable aspect here. We also have challenge series. As you progress throughout the main story and finish stages, you unlock the ability to compete in side mode races and compete for medals. What these medals are used for is unlocking new cars to use in the run, and of course, bragging rights. Challenge series is a fine side activity. There are some unique bits here, such as the sponsored Can-Am or Old Spice events, which use some pretty exclusive and unique cars. And speaking of cars, you can use a hell of a lot more cars in challenge series than you can in the main campaign. Sure, if you unlock them, you can use them in the main campaign, but this gets back to what I was talking about near the start of the video. I'm all for unlocking cars and having to work for them, but locking them behind a part of the game which doesn't even relate to the main campaign, and using it as basically filler content to keep people playing it just isn't the right way to do it, especially with multiplayer objectives. This might have been fine when the game first released, but the online for the run was killed off last year, rendering some of the cars in this game completely unobtainium for everyone who didn't get them already. These aren't my only issues with the run, however, as while I do adore this game, let's go over a few things that I'm not as fond of. I think starting with the obvious, the campaign is just way too short. If you're quick, you can finish the entire thing in 3 hours. I'm fine with shorter games, as long as they're memorable, which the run is, but 3 hours is just not enough. I think the direction that was picked was to use challenge mode as a way to encourage you to unlock more cars and then use those new cars to compete in the run multiple times. And Blackbox wanted the run to be very competitive, trying to beat your friends' times across the country as time went on, but I personally, at least, just don't feel like this was the best approach to take. And who knows, maybe what they had planned was to see what audience reaction was for this blockbuster style Need for Speed, and then expand upon the idea for later entries. Unfortunately though, this game just didn't do as well as they hoped. The run, when it released, certainly had its fan base, but it didn't have as much appeal as hoped, and it turned out to be a sales failure. Game critics at the time simply sucked at video games, with IGN saying that this game was not only difficult, but that you had to, quote, drive like an asshole. I'm sorry, but IGN, was this your first time reviewing a racing game? Especially one of this nature. It hurts to see as the amount of potential here really is incredible, but before we close, let's move into my final thoughts. Final thoughts on the run. I think that undeniably, this game is a must experience. You can get a copy cheap. It's on 7th gen consoles, PC, and even the 3DS, believe it or not. So finding it isn't an issue. And funnily enough, I think that the best time to play the run is right now. This game wouldn't be worth full price brand new to me, but for 15-20 bucks, I think you more than get your explosions per dollar here. And while it absolutely is not perfect, if you're just looking for a unique experience and some good old-fashioned fun, there really isn't much better than the run.
That just makes you a beta cuck.